2024 City Council Work Session Meeting. Our meetings are public and you're welcome to join us in person or by watching from the Council's agenda page, Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope you'll continue to join us in whatever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there is no public comment. Please join us tonight during our 6 p.m. formal meeting, note that is 6 p.m., to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime by mail to P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah, 84114-5476, by email at council.comments@slcgov.com, or via our 24-hour phone comment line 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted to our website, slccouncil.com. We'll now begin our work session, and the first item on the agenda is updates from the administration. Andrew Johnston, Director of Homeless Policy and Outreach, is joining us at the table, as is Nate Cobes and Jesse Stewart. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know who's going first. Is it Jesse or me?
I don't know. It's dealer's choice.
We'll see. Pull the slide up. We'll see what happens.
We're giving you autonomy and...
All right, go next slide. Oh, it's me.
I'll switch with you.
We can go.
I can try yours. You try mine.
As you can see, council members, there was a slight decrease from last time we met in the shelter occupancy. It's 99.2%. It was 99.4%. Good news or bad news, depending on how you look at it. We also continue to do encampment impact mitigation work and rapid intervention team work. You'll see 1700 South, the Glendale Regional Park area will be the focus this week for the county efforts with us. And then the rapid intervention team will spend some time on the Jordan River, particularly Backman before back to school next week. Day Riverside area, Ninth South, Hidden Hollow, Sherwood Park. We had a resource fair at Pioneer Park. It went very well last Friday, and then this coming Friday is Kayak Court at Modesto Park. And Kayak Court has sort of expanded fair amount to also include not just the river, but other places nearby, or places we're seeing a lot of folks coming to try and give the same resources from the courts for folks who may not be on the river this year. And then we had a question as well about the micro shelter community move. And to make sure we have the update for you all, if you've been down to 600 West, you've noticed perhaps that the fencing is still up, but the buildings are gone. They've been moved over to the 700 West site, and the State Office of Homeless Services is busy working on that site with their contractors. They estimate that they'll have that open by October, also that to be safe, and be able to have the 50 individuals come back to that location at that point. Are there any questions on the micro shelter move from anyone? All right, we had a couple of other questions that came up from the council members about homelessness that I wanted to address before we get too far in. The one was about the micro shelters. Another one had to do with the Other Side Village. And while the city is not directly involved in setting up the Other Side Village, the Other Side Village is its own nonprofit that's doing that work. I did have an update from Tim Stay with that group about where they are in their process and some details that I can share with you all. The first one, probably most salient to you, is the current construction timeline. And they've done a lot of work there. As you know, over the last 3 years, there's a lot of environmental remediation, even up until this year. They've removed a lot of dirt. They've done a lot of support work there. And I think at this point they're saying that they are currently working on the remaining utility infrastructure to go in there. So water and electrical. They're reporting that in the next 2 months they should be done with that. After that would be roads, paths, and foundations for the structures. 30 homes in place, they're saying this calendar year, and then other buildings as well subsequent to that. The other thing that you are probably aware of, I know Councilmember Petro was at the grand opening. You can hear me, the donut shop on Redwood Road. That's also linked to this site as well in close proximity. And The other piece that they've had going on for 15 months is their Welcome Village, which is a separate location in Murray right now, which will be moving to Salt Lake City eventually, they say. And that is where folks who have been experiencing homelessness, and particularly chronic homelessness, have been going as an introduction piece to this program, where they get a lot of the services there as they would move into the new units as they come online. And again, that's folks with who experience chronic homelessness, which means you've been homeless for a longer period of time and you have a disabling condition of some sort. So they are focusing on that population who will move into the new units when they're available. Are there any questions on that piece?
Andrew, I want to reaffirm this. The intention with the village is not that everyone who lives there has to work in some sort of enterprise connected to the organization, correct? That they can choose to go get jobs somewhere else, Section 8 vouchers, all of, if disability, Social Security, all of those are options for people to still get housing there, correct?
So from my understanding, council member, that is correct. Many people will choose to work in the enterprises of the Other Side Academy sort of sponsored enterprises, but I don't believe it's a requirement to work in those particular situations. And one of the big things we've worked with them on, and they've agreed to with us, is fair housing rules are very important across the board. So making sure everybody has the opportunity for housing there and the choice about employment or other services.
Yeah, it feels like, once you're in the village and living a longer term experience than a short term recovery, self-determination should become important to a healthy whole future for people. So thank you. Anyone else? Okay.
The last question I believe that was asked of the administration related to this particularly was on Library Square, folks who are here on site, and I think the language is encampments and what we're doing with that. And so Nate Cobbs is here from the administration side, from the building and the grounds, to help answer questions on that. What we've seen is in the summertime generally an increase in people in public spaces in the city across the board. We also tend to see them at the libraries, parks, and City Hall as a public space. This summer, with some remediation done on Library Square, there's a big section of Library Square that's not accessible. We did see some movement of folks from there to mostly the north side of Washington Square. What we're not seeing, to be clear, is camping. And that's a definition in our statutes about structures and what you're doing with your personal items for some amount of time in a public space. What we're not seeing is camping. We are seeing a lot of people there during the daytime, but also enforcement of our curfew, which is 11 p.m. on these public spaces. So that is happening, and most of the security intervention is on CBI Security as the security provider for this space, with support from Salt Lake City PD, and Nate can talk to that if there's questions in particular.
Council, any questions? Councilwoman Lopez Chavez?
Sure, I'd love to hear if there's any equipment or apparatuses needed to further secure and maintain the safety of Washington Square and Library Square Plaza.
There is an ongoing project that we're discussing for physical security implementations, but that's a ways out. When it comes to the issue that we're dealing with right now, the violence and some criminal incidents that happen because of our unhoused residents on the property, that's the main concern right now. Is that the case? Manpower for our security team is the biggest. We cover Washington Square, Library Square, and Plaza 349 with the potential to expand to other locations as well. That takes a lot. And to patrol all of those grounds takes away from staffing here at City Hall. So manpower would be the biggest issue. Our CBI team has done a fantastic job to be present and available out on Washington Square to deter some violent crime and illegal activity. But again, as they patrol through and leave to go to other areas, it leaves holes and vulnerabilities. Just yesterday, we had a fight out on the north northwest corner of the property. That's because there was nobody available at the time. So when we talk about equipment and apparatus, I don't see anything that would allow us to help. The best thing would be manpower.
Andrew, I think this one is more, so we went and walked on the river trail as well. And a lot of what we're seeing is people congregating in places that we've designated as public as a function of having nowhere else to go. And that's not really illegal, like we said, like it's not camping. They're not actively transacting drugs in open ways, even though we do know that populations who live under stress are more prone to things like violent exchanges and can become victims of predatory other acts, as we see that really on the Jordan River Trail. What would an ecosystem that provided an alternative to this look like? Is there a day treatment program that we're missing? I know the shelters are full, but people go there to sleep at night and then they leave each day. So what do you, and maybe this is a longer term question, is there something in the ecosystem that falls within the city parameters, or do you feel confident that what the state is leading towards leads us to an ultimate resolution? I completely understand, like my kids wanted to take tracks home yesterday, and I told them absolutely not and made them actually get on a returning tracks to come back to this building because our stop is the fairgrounds stop and they are not walking on that river trail at this moment. I am not downplaying, and I understand why our constituents are living with the stress and the fear and the responsiveness to this, but an element of this is just being poor in a city, and there has to be a way to assist with that element of it.
Yeah, so council member, what we've seen in healthy ecosystems, as you put it, where we have services and shelter and housing, are places to be. And so our current shelter system is a 24-hour system, so somebody can be there day and night if they choose to be. Many people do sleep there and then go to work or activities during the daytime. But some people will stay there all day as well with the people they feel comfortable with, getting services, that sort of thing. Healthy housing programs oftentimes have that as well. It's just permanent housing, and you can be there with your community with activities as well. Now, some folks do want that daytime communal nature and hanging out, and that's where we talk about other services and social aspects, and libraries have served this for a lot of people in libraries during the day. It's a healthy, safe place. They meet people they feel comfortable with. When they follow the rules, it's not a problem. The same thing happens in our public spaces and our parks. People are welcome there, and we want to encourage them to be there, and our security is there for when things illicit or illegal are happening, and we want to intervene there and prevent that as much as possible, and then address it very quickly when it happens. And same thing on Library Square. We want to make sure that our rapid intervention team, our advantage services, the downtown ambassadors are all available to help. But what we need at night is more shelter, a place to be overnight, because everybody here goes someplace at night. We don't always know where it is, but they're coming back here because they can get sometimes water, sometimes shade, obviously, a place to be that's safe for them as well, oftentimes. Most people, what we see, are looking for safety for themselves also. And they may know places that feel more safe versus less safe, and this is one of the places that feels much more safe because of the things that Nate and his team are doing. So there's a healthy balance. We're working with the state on more shelter, hopefully as soon as possible. Our day services at the Wiegand Center downtown are always available with showers and water. We're opening more housing and shelter as much as we possibly can. And so the Other Side Village is a good example of something that's taking housing as a core piece, adding the communal piece to it, where you have purpose, a job sometimes, people you feel comfortable with. You build a really social network, and it means you don't have to come places like this to get that.
Thank you. I think Councilwoman Lopez Chavez and I have we've had a lot of conversations about how it's our dream for public spaces to be public shared spaces and for people to not be dependent on them. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Councilwoman Lopez.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, I think when we talk about public space management, there is, I've seen other policies, I've been reading on different case studies, even around the world globally, as to how to interact with unsheltered communities. But certainly, even Tosa or the other side village, it's not low barrier enough daytime shelter. And I just want to recognize there are certainly some inhumanities that are happening out publicly and in place where we congregate and participate and do our business and line of work. I'd love to see a public space management plan for just Washington Square Plaza and Library Square. Certainly the place where we conduct our business needs to be safe for all our residents to visit, whether you're sheltered or unsheltered. So just something to consider.
Anyone else? All right.
I believe that Jesse Stewart's here to talk to some other questions that were brought up.
Yeah, go to the next slide, please.
Jesse, could you confirm the green light is on your microphone?
Yes, I can. It is now on. Yeah, I'm in here to talk a little bit about Great Salt Lake and the levels. Wait, can you put that down so I can see it? Thanks, appreciate it. Going to the next slide. That first slide is really for me so I can file this away and know when I gave a presentation. So here's a graph of Great Salt Lake levels. We got both the north and the south arm. Really the south arm is the fresher side. The north arm is the more saline side, the red side of the north side of the causeway there. So this goes all the way back to 2007. You can see right now we're sitting at about 4193 feet above sea level. We're doing well. You can see where we were at the start of the year from a low level, historic low level in 2022 to this level we are now. We're still not up to the optimal level. The maximum level of 4211 in 1986, that's not the optimal level. The optimal level is going to be somewhere between 4198 and 4205. So we've got some room to go there. I know we had a great winter the year before last. We had a pretty good winter this last year, but that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. We're not out of drought yet. So we're going to continue to watch that, continue to work with the state on different ways to manage. They're doing ways to manage the Great Salt Lake as far as getting water in there, increasing flows, looking at dust issues, all those sorts of things. And I'll provide a few links here at the end of the presentation to some of the state's websites. It's really good information if you want to dig a little deeper into what's going on. So you can see there's always going to be kind of annual changes to the Great Salt Lake as we go. So hopefully we'll go down a little bit, but then we'll continue to rise, and hopefully we have an upward trend for the next several years. Next slide, please. I don't want to talk just about Great Salt Lake because I think you can't look at it as just a single reservoir. So this is from the Bureau of Reclamation, and this just shows a lot of the reservoirs along the Wasatch Front. You can see we're looking pretty good right now. We've got really quite full reservoirs for this time of year. Strawberry Reservoir isn't shown on here. I was riding my bike up there this last weekend, and it is as full as I've ever seen it. It's 97% full right now. That's not a natural flow into Great Salt Lake, but through diversions and water contracts, water does come down the Strawberry River and Spanish Fork River, and Hobble Creek and get into the Utah Lake system, Great Salt Lake system. So you can see we're doing really well. This means hopefully we'll have, if we have a good winter, we're starting off with full reservoirs and more water will get to Great Salt Lake. I don't think any water managers are going to start releasing water ahead of time. So we'll play the game in the springtime, watching the snowpack and trying to make the educated guesses and educated decisions at that point as far as whether to release water or whether to store as we go forward. But starting off where we are now, we're looking really good. And Utah Lake is also not shown on here, but I wrote that in because that's all part of the same watershed. It's 93.4% full right now. So it's really looking good also. So starting off with full reservoirs, it always gives me pause because I have to manage stormwater too, but it's one of those things I would rather start off with a good issue now than have an issue down the road.
Councilmember Mono?
It's August. Is it typical, like is 93% good for August, or is it seems like water would have evaporated by now. I don't know how.
No, there's still good flows. So the rivers themselves still have good base flows. So even in Big and Little Cottonwood Creek, we're seeing water that we typically might not see in the height of the drought. We were, wringing out sponges to get water, and we're passing water by the plants.
I think I know how I should have asked my question. Do we ever see reservoirs at 100%? Like, is that what we're actually aiming for?
No,
or is this like pretty good?
100% means you're going to spill. So you
Okay.
have to let water go at 100%. So you will see them close to 100%, but at that point, water's got to go out of them. So they'll go there, and then eventually through evaporation and then through water use, whether it's irrigation diversions or culinary diversions, those will start dropping down late summer as demand outpaces supply coming in.
So for all intents and purposes, this is very, very good news.
We're looking pretty good right now. Yeah, I'd say we're looking good, especially coming out of well, not coming out, we're still in the drought, but for being in the drought, we're looking really good as far as reservoir elevations go right now. Yeah. That said, we'll keep watching it through the water year, which really starts October 15th. And then we'll want to come back to you all as we get further down to say what we look like going into the next season. But starting off full is better than starting off really down low. We're still pretty low on Great Salt Lake, so that's something that we'll continue to watch and move forward with. Next slide. So I just want to provide a few links here. So this is the state of Utah's Great Salt Lake page. This has got just a wonderful amount of really good information from the commissioner and all the work they're doing, whether it's going to be a dust study, air quality study, a water quality study, or just monitoring the water levels themselves. Next slide. This is just an example of something that's on there. So this is the Great Salt Lake Strategic Plan, and this is where they lay out what the optimal elevation is. And again, like I said, right now we're sitting at about 4193 feet above sea level, and optimal elevations 4198 to 4205. So we're still 5 feet down. And that 5 feet is an immense amount of surface area. So one report says for every foot elevation you gain, that's about 70 square miles of land. Because think about walking into the ocean, and one of those where you just walk forever and you just stay hip deep. At the Great Salt Lake, you walk forever and you stay ankle deep. So you just keep going and going. So every foot of elevation is just an immense amount of land coverage. Next slide. This is from the Utah Geologic Survey, and this has got some really good information on current Great Salt Lake and historic Lake Bonneville. So again, if you ever just want some really interesting, you want to go down the rabbit hole of Great Salt Lake, go onto some of these web pages, and you can immerse yourself pretty readily in information about Great Salt Lake. I think I have one final slide, unless that's it. That might be it. Again, pretty brief today of just letting you know, from a water manager perspective, we're looking good. From a Great Salt Lake, we're hopefully on the right trajectory, but again, it's going to be what we see in the next couple of years.
Councilwoman Lopez Chavez?
Thank you for this, and thank you for being such a great steward of the GSL. Is there anything that Salt Lake could do to increase flow back into the Great Salt Lake?
So we're already working on that with the effluent from our water treatment plant. So that would be dedicated to Great Salt Lake, or at least a portion of it that we still have water rights to. Other things are just conservation. Again, if that water will go to Great Salt Lake somehow, it comes down from the 5 or 6 or the 6 creeks here, or from the Provo River, it will make its way to the terminal lake, because Great Salt Lake is a terminal lake. So that's something we're watching carefully.
And in addition to that question, is there any infrastructure such as gutters or anything that can help? I know that I've heard this sometimes when we have backed up gutters, that's harmful, that hurts our ability to get that water flow back in.
It will eventually either seep into the ground, and the groundwater would eventually get back to Great Salt Lake also as it upwells down in the valley. But that's part of stormwater conveyance, and the better we can have that, it lowers the risk for any kind of localized flooding, and it does convey it out to Great Salt Lake a little faster. And all that goes through either one of the creeks into the river, or through a couple drains that go straight out to the lake.
I'm just going to say that I have the worst looking yard in Salt Lake City, and I'm just going to say it's for the Great Salt Lake and make myself feel better. Councilmember Wharton, did you have something?
Yes, and not at all related to the Great Salt Lake, but yesterday afternoon or something, like a water main broke right outside my house, and it was coming down the road, and it was coming out of one of the little, not the manhole, but like the smaller thing, and then it split the road, and it was coming out of the cracks, and it started to create a sinkhole. It was a wild afternoon, but you guys at the fire department came and shut it off, and so I was very nervous about that because we have a new baby at our house, and washing hands is really important. And so anyway, the crew came out and they fixed it, and it was all done, and water was back on by 1 a.m. And I just wanted to say that was awesome, and you guys did such a great job. And thank you. When I saw it happening, I was like, oh my God, we're gonna have to move out for like a couple days. But yeah, I was super impressed. So please tell the crew thank you, and thanks for all the great work you do.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'll pass that on. Our crews do incredibly good work in rain or shine, 100+ degree weather or minus degree weather. So I'll pass that on. Appreciate it. Sorry it happened in front of your house.
Oh, it's bound to happen.
I'll try not to let that happen again. But,
it's bound to happen. It's a very old part of town.
Okay.
Anyone else? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll move on now to item number 2, draft policies for housing program funds in the Community and Neighborhoods Department. Allison Rowland, Council Policy Analyst, will be at the table, joined by Tammy Hunsaker, our CAN Deputy Director. Allison, the time is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an opportunity for you as the council to consider several related draft proposals from CAN for new or amended housing program policies and their funding mechanisms. The policies include, first, a housing program funds policy, which is in part a sort of umbrella policy for other policies that I'll talk about in a minute. And it also includes establishing a new tenant and homeowner loan fund. So that is included in this. And then the other programs, the other programs that are included under the umbrella of the housing program funds policy are 3 of the direct delivery housing programs, which include the home repair program, community land trust program, and the new naturally occurring affordable housing preservation pilot program. This is a program that the council funded for $1.2 million in FY24. And it is, you can get a update on where that program is now from these people. They'll have the latest. The proposed policies and funding amounts, because there are several, I tried to summarize them in a chart in the staff report, and that's on section C. And then on the other hand, this also includes funding. This is not actually, this briefing is strictly informational. There isn't anything for you to vote or sign off on concerning this at this point, but the transmittal does include specific uses for the remaining dormant funds. It includes expansion of some of the city housing programs, and it also includes paying off and closing old lines of credit. Since the transmittal was sent, the amount of funds under consideration has gone from $5.9 million to $6.3 million. It's been several months since the transmittal was sent because the city budget got in the way, the budget negotiations. So it has been about 4 months since the transmittal was sent. But the proposed funding changes will be transmitted as part of a future budget amendment. So you'll have those to consider more specifically with an updated amount of funds and additional information. So I will pass it over to Tammy and her team.
Thank you, Allison. As Allison mentioned, over the past several months, we've been having discussions about dormant program income that has generated from various housing programs and housing stability. And you may remember a couple of months ago, you adopted a substantial amendment to the city's 5-year consolidated plan, and that allocated the HUD restricted portion of those dormant program income funds. And as Allison mentioned, there's unallocated, unrestricted dormant program income remaining to be allocated by the council. So today we have draft policies in your packet for the council's consideration, and this is the first step in adopting legislative policies for the council and the administration to be on the same page for how program funds are managed financially and also how the housing programs operate. We would also like to review the administration's proposed budget allocations for those unallocated dormant program income funds. So if we could actually jump ahead 2 slides, please. So beginning with the housing program funds, this policy will establish budgeting and reporting standards for the city housing program funds. We are proposing that a revolving loan fund, to be called the Tenant and Homeowner Loan Fund, be established as a self-replenishing source of revenue to continue to fund the housing programs. For this discussion, is it important to establish a distinction between the different types of housing programs administered by the city? We allocate funding to housing programs that are administered by a third party, and within the policy, we call these subrecipient programs. We also keep revenue within the city and administer housing programs directly to owners, tenants, and property owners, and we use these as direct delivery programs. Next slide, please. The annual budget process within the proposed policy would flow as demonstrated on this chart. HUD funds, along with Funding Our Future, would be budgeted through the annual competitive application process that are used to for HUD funds. This is the application process followed by recommendations by the CDCIP board, the mayor, with final funding allocations made by the council. The difference moving forward would be that we would wrap the Funding Our Future housing program funds into the competitive application process. Currently, while HUD funds go out through the competitive application, Funding Our Future goes out through a separate RFP. So we feel like combining these funds into one process will help improve transparency and help us better coordinate funding and resources. So Funding Our Future and HUD funds would go out that way, and then we're also proposing to establish a tenant and homeowner revolving loan fund. That would be a self-replenishing pool of funding that would only be available to the city's direct delivery programs to keep city funds revolving for these programs. And since the funding would not be available to subrecipients, we are proposing that we make direct budget recommendations through the mayor's recommended budget rather than going out through the competitive application. So mayor's recommended budget, council allocations to delivery programs. Next slide, please. This chart, while it's a little busy, it does show the flow of program income within the city. So the available funding sources for the direct delivery programs are Funding Our Future, HUD, and the Tenant and Homeowner Loan Fund. Currently, right now, Funding Our Future doesn't fund the direct delivery programs, but it could in the future. So once funding is allocated to the direct delivery programs, like the CLT, the home repair, and the naturally occurring affordable housing program, these programs generate program income through loan repayments, through the sale of property. And the treatment of the program income would depend on the source of funding. If it's Funding Our Future or HUD, the funding would go back into the competitive application process, and it could fund direct delivery programs in the future, or it could go out of the city and fund subrecipient programs. So that would be the competitive application process. If the original source of funding is the tenant and homeowner loan fund, it would stay within that loan fund, so it would drop into the loan fund and then be reallocated to direct delivery programs through the mayor's recommended budget and final allocations by the council. And we've set it up this way so that there is a dedicated ongoing source of replenishing revenue for the city's direct delivery programs, which right now are the CLT, the home repair, and the naturally occurring affordable housing preservation program. So that's how we're contemplating the revolving loan fund to work. And then the next slide, please. The Housing Programs Fund policy also proposes that a committee be established called the Housing Program Funds Loan Committee. And this committee would be charged with final direct allocations for the home repair program and the community land trust program. So the council would delegate the responsibility of allocating specific awards to this committee. And the reason why we're proposing that is because we want these funds and the recipients to remain confidential. They're low and moderate income homeowners, so it would be challenging to have all of those applications go to the city council for final funding approval. However, since the naturally occurring affordable housing program is to property owners, we're proposing that the committee review those applications and make a recommendation that is forwarded to the council, so the NOAA program funding allocations would actually come back to the council for final approval. And the policy proposes that the composition of that committee be 2 members of the CDCIP board, the director of community and neighborhoods or designee, the director of housing stability or designee, and the city's chief financial officer or designee. And so I will turn it over to Tony and Heather, and they are talking about the specific program policies that are up for consideration. Right now in your packet, you have draft policies for your consideration, but the next step would be coming back to council with formal resolutions once we have the council's feedback for adoption. So I will turn it over to Tony and Heather.
Thanks. Can we get the next slide, please? I'm going to give you a high-level overview of the home repair program policy. So the mission of that program, which is a currently existing program, is to provide financial assistance to low and moderate income homeowners for expenses related to maintaining safe and stable housing. It preserves existing housing stock as well as the health and well-being of those families that are occupying those homes. This funding is currently and is proposed to continue to be provided on a first come, first served basis for eligible households. The city, in order to ensure compliance with federal regulations and procurement code, does provide project management services and issue funding directly to the construction contractors on behalf of the homeowners. This funding assistance would provide grants up to $2,500 for seniors and persons with a disabling condition. And then for all of those outside those parameters, it would be a loan, which is proposed to be deferred for those at or below 50% of area median income, and an amortized loan for those 50 to 80% of area median income. There is more detail and a chart that breaks all of this down in the detailed loan policies in front of you in your packet. And then the funding approval for this program, the Housing Program Funds Loan Committee, in order to ensure the confidentiality of those applying for the program.
Can we advance the slides? The next program to discuss is our Community Land Trust program, which was created by Council in 2017. Unfortunately, when it was created, it was lacking policy and policy direction. Currently, we have 17 homes that are occupied in the Community Land Trust, with some additional homes yet to receive or put benefit with the homeowners being placed into those homes. The mission for the Community Land Trust is that the city designates property as part of the land trust. Sometimes it's referred to as shared equity programs or shared equity models, but it's the city retains the ownership of the land and sells only the housing unit, the structure, to a qualified home buyer at 80% AMI or below. So to facilitate the affordability for the home buyer, the city leases the land to the homeowner through a below market rate lease, which may provide the mortgage financing for the purchase of the housing unit. The big high-level policy objectives program is to build generational wealth for these homeowners, It's an opportunity for them to have all the many waterfall positive benefits of having home ownership and stability, combat displacement in our neighborhoods facing gentrification, and then reject historical policies that perpetuate the racial wealth gap. Next slide. The main uses for the funding for the program, of course, would be to repurchase, to rehabilitate, financing for the homeowners, and then as well for acquisition and development of future properties. The homeowner equity is 1.75 of the original sale price for each year of the homeowner who has owned this home. So again, that is the structure, 1.75 for this structure. That again has to be supported by an appraisal at the time of, and then of course, whatever they're putting into for their mortgage that they were able to pull out. 1.75, this is kind of standard community land trust practice. Applicant prioritization, it is first come, first served. It's available for all residents, but then we do try to make sure that they are appropriate to the appropriate match, number of bedrooms, number of persons in looking to purchase a home. But then we do want to make sure that we're serving the right community and keep people in the neighborhood who have history with the neighborhood. So we want to make sure that we're giving prioritization to households who currently reside in the city or households who have previously lived in the city that were displaced due to rising housing costs or redevelopment of the property. Again, approval would come down to the proposed Housing Program Funds Loan Committee. Next slide.
So the next one we're going to talk about is the Naturally Occurring Affordable Housing Preservation Pilot Program, or NOAA. The goal of this program, which received budgeted funding in fiscal year 24, is to provide financial assistance to property owners of naturally occurring affordable housing in order for them to carry out property improvements in return for a long-term covenant to preserve affordability of those units. The funding assistance would be a combination of grants and loans with a higher proportion of grant funding for those with deeper levels of affordability. And then the eligible properties for those would be those that are not currently deed restricted, requiring affordable rents or an expiring deed restriction. Units that are currently being rented at a rate affordable to households at or below 80% of area median income and have a demonstrated gap in funding, which would be required to improve, maintain, or operate the property while maintaining affordable rents. Next slide, please. The affordability term would be either 15 years or the term of the loan, whichever is greater, with the affordability being ensured by a master lease with a housing authority or other similarly qualified agency, or a deed restriction. And then funding availability for this, we've contemplated to initially go out through a competitive NOFA, and then any remaining funding after that would be available on a first come, first serve until the funding, as long as the funding is still available. And the funding approval for this one, since we'd be dealing with property owners, would be a recommendation by the Housing Program Funds Loan Committee, and then a final approval by City Council. Next slide, please.
So you can see too with the breakdown of the available unrestricted, unallocated portions, that first one, that 1.2 for the NOAA care of in last year's budget. And so it's the remaining items that the administration is putting forward for recommendation, which we of course would come back through the budget amendment process, possibly budget amendment 2 or 3.
We're happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Council members. Councilmember Mono.
Can you go back to that chart with the arrows?
Yes.
Okay, so I think I'm following it. The competitive application process, so subrecipient programs are like
Neighbor Works or
Neighbor
the Road
Works,
Home
the nonprofits that we fund through CDBG funds. So this, at the top, it says Funding Our Future, HUD, and
the tenant homeowner loan. That's the loan fund.
the funding sources for that. But some of the funding sources from HUD will never go into this circle, will go directly to subrecipients, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this
So
is just...
this is
okay.
only how the program income is treated for the direct delivery program funds once they're in the direct delivery programs.
And is there, it looks like there's 2 levels at which funds could go to multiple different programs, the top level CLT, home repair, NOAA, and then the generation of that can go back into Funding Our Future and HUD or back into the Housing Development Loan Fund. The second level looks like it's dependent on the original source. So if it was originally from not Housing Development, the Tenant and Homeowner Loan Fund, then would go back into Tenant and Homeowner Loan Fund. But if it was originally from something else, it would automatically go into that Funding Our Future HUD group that could be recycled back into this.
And that is because HUD program income maintains federal regulations in perpetuity.
Perfect. Okay.
Funding Our Future doesn't. Those are local funds, but we group them together because we're proposing now that the HUD and the fund is rolled into the same application process, because right now there's the HUD application process, and then we internally do an RFP for the Funding Our Future funds. So we think having them allocated through one process will increase transparency and also the ability to coordinate resources better, because you guys never even see the Funding Our Future.
And is this, when we say HUD, that's all of the CDBG?
CDBG, Home, ESG, and HOPWA. However, for the direct delivery programs, it will primarily be Home that fund those programs.
Got it. But that is the same process that funds, that we go through every year, that funds different things, some of them not related to housing as well.
Correct.
Okay, so there will be one application process for pretty much all of the things that all the funds that CAN is putting out into the community, with the exception of, there was one that was
if you go back one slide, actually, it helps to illustrate that. So Funding Our Future and HUD, whether it's new or program income, follows the column on the left, the application process. The revolving loan fund funds are treated separate. We're proposing they don't go out through an application process because we want to keep those funds revolving for the direct delivery programs within the city. They would not be available to subrecipient applicants. So based on the current needs of the city, what programs are in more demand, we would propose direct allocations through the mayor's recommended budget, and then the council would approve those allocations. So the revolving loan fund would have the pot of funding, and then the administration will propose and the council will approve which specific direct delivery programs get allocations, if that makes sense.
I think so. And then is it a council decision how much goes into NOAA versus THLF versus, okay.
Correct.
Great. And that would go through the annual budget, mayor recommended budget. Okay. I think this is clear. Thanks.
Councilmember Dugan?
Thank you for that clarification. And on the Funding Our Future, I mean, our Funding Our Future has different restrictions than the HUD, but this funding, since they're combining them, will just keep the HUD restrictions on the use of it, and we're just kind of blending them two together.
We would not put HUD restrictions on the Funding Our Future, but it would go out through the same application process. So if you remember the HUD funding logs, there's different logs. There's CDBG and Home, and those all have different regulations. We would kind of treat Funding Our Future as a separate log, and keep the funding sources separate, but it would go out through the same process so we can coordinate those resources.
Okay, so go out through the same process, but it's another stream. So
yes,
you could add Funding Our Futures to a Home or ES.
Yeah.
You could.
So for example, when you guys move money around and want to fund a program, we could maybe tap into Funding Our Future to help fill the gap, or it would just allow you to coordinate those resources better.
And then at the end, when it goes back into it, it would still go say in the Funding Our Future streamline. Okay,
correct.
Yes.
Council, we're at time for this issue, so Councilmember Romano, close us out.
Okay, I think it'll be quick. So will Funding Our Future within that application process have its own separate, like, eligibility criteria, or do we think it'll just augment the other HUD programs that we've already created in our 5-year plan?
I think Tony may have some input on this, but I think we actually may want to have that conversation with you, because years ago there were categories approved within the mayor's recommended budget for Funding Our Future, and those categories have carried over year to year, but we have not reviewed those in recent years with the council, and I think we would like to open up that discussion, especially with the adoption of Thriving in Place and the new housing plan, maybe changing those priorities.
And that is something that the staff plans to bring to leadership to decide whether you want to have a separate briefing on that.
Feels like a good thing to prioritize. I did want to put on the public record, in my private life where I do work that's not city related, I am working in the housing space, and I was with a local nonprofit known for their ability to create housing and home ownership options for people from historic demographics that don't get the opportunity. And Tony, they could not sing your praises enough. Your name was a theme through it, and I was so proud to be associated with the city. So thank you for all the work that you all are doing. These are some beautiful logic models. These are beautiful ways for us to track what's going on. So thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
All right, let's move on then to the next topic, which is the Sports, Entertainment, Culture, and Convention District Text Amendment follow-up. We're going to have Nick Tarbett, Council Policy Analyst, Michaela Octe, Assistant Planning Director, Kelsey Lindquist, Planning Manager, and Daniel Echeverria, did I say that right? Close, Senior Planner. All right. We will turn the time over to you.
All right, thank you. This is a follow-up briefing from the proposed ordinance that would amend the D4 Secondary Central Business District zoning district to support the creation of the Sports, Entertainment, Culture, and Convention District. The key changes include modifying the maximum building height to 600 feet, modifying setback requirements to facilitate plazas and other similar uses, changing the table of allowed uses to include stadium and commercial parking as permitted uses, and to expand the existing sign overlay on the Delta Center block to the Convention Center blocks. So as I mentioned, this is a follow-up briefing. The first one was held on July 2nd, and at that time the council gave some direction to staff for follow-up. Back then, the council agreed to capping the maximum allowed building height at 600 feet and to require design review for buildings over 75 feet. We'll come back to this shortly. You clarified what constitutes on-premise advertising within the sign overlay so future signs could advertise other events and commercial activities that occur within the overlay boundaries. And you added regulations to the sign overlay so that signs oriented towards public streets have certain requirements for how long images can be displayed before images change, how fast they can change, as well as brightness regulations. So those, in addition to a few other items, planning staff has worked on and brought back information for you to consider. Additionally, the Smith Entertainment Group provided feedback on the proposed ordinance, and they have some requested changes for the council to consider putting into the final ordinance. So we're proposing that today we step through, I think we have about 8 straw polls for you to give staff direction on how to include this policy guidance in the final ordinance. Scott, could you pull up this? We have one slide for everybody to look at. It's really good. A lot of the time people ask, where are we in this process? It's really good. And if you look down on the bottom right, August 13th is where we are, but the council's done all this, has had all these other meetings on the participation agreement as well as the zoning ordinance. The next steps would be council to consider this on October 27th for potential adoption. Per state statute, it needs August, right? I don't know what I said, but it is August. You have until August 27th to adopt this, to meet the state statute deadline. And then in the fall, of this year, the city will be working with Smith Entertainment Group on the development agreement. Has been mentioned often throughout the briefings. Finally, the council has until December 31st to consider adopting the sales tax. So that's just the general lay of the land. If you're okay, Madam Chair, if we can just step through the straw polls.
Yes, please.
Planning staff is here, as well as the attorney's office, to help help with any questions you may have through the process. So first and foremost, maximum building height of 600 feet. The council was supportive of that, but it was with design review for any building 75 feet or above. SEG has requested the council consider 250 feet. After some review, planning has indicated they could support 200 feet because that would be consistent with what the D1 zoning district has. So does the council have a preference on that?
Clarifying that the maximum buildable height is 600, and this is allowing that with design review at 200. So you're asking for a straw poll. Anyone want to call it?
I first want to clarify this because we had some difference of opinions in the other meetings where the staff recommendation was 200 feet and approval at that point at the staff level. And I'm not comfortable with it just leaving it at the staff level. I would like to see it at 200 feet, going through the normal process that a design review goes through. So 200 feet with the normal process of a design review. That's my recommendation, not leaving it at the staff level.
Council, anyone else want to?
That is still where I think I am, Councilmember Dugan. I just think that it'll be more beneficial to have that input from residents looking at it and residents applying those standards. Not that I don't have a ton of confidence in planning staff. Of course I do. But I think that for purposes of this project and how significant it is going to be to our downtown, I would like to have that additional input from the residents.
Madam Chair, can you clarify, would that match the D1 requirements where it would be no special approval required up to 200 feet and then approval by planning commission above 200? So what was just proposed by Councilor Dugan would be the exact same as D1?
That's correct.
And that was basically my reasoning for it, is to match the D1 and not have another exception to our process.
Councilwoman Young, do you have Lopez Chavez?
No, I'm ready to vote. To clarify, did we call a straw poll?
So I think the straw poll being called by Councilmember Dugan is approval up to 600 with design review and full design review by Planning Commission at 200 feet. I actually feel like we know there's going to be two significant towers. Those are the two that I feel like we should be getting public feedback on. There's going to be an assortment. We still don't know how many, and in order to not exhaust, I'm worried that this overwhelms Planning Commission because it will require quick attention. And we have an entire city to build and pay attention to, not just one district. So I'm worried that this actually overwhelms Planning Commission. And so in the name of efficiency, I would like to see either, if we are going to go to Planning Commission, a bundling of buildings so that a few at a time are being contemplated and not each individual structure, or I'd like to give administrative review the green light for certain circumstances, and then for me the biggest concern are the towers that are going to go taller than anything we have, making sure we get community input on those.
Can I ask a question?
That's my only apprehension on this.
And I'll just jump in there. Sorry, the idea that bundling was brought up, and I think that the planning staff and commission can do that
Right.
because they're of like area of. I'm going to say like area.
Development area.
Development area to allow that, so you don't have five individual ones when they're all right next to each other. So
I'd like that
and I think the
caveated just to make sure we're not
planning would do that.
killing bandwidth.
And if I may, in the inverse, Michaela, I'll lean on you. Could we, if needed to expedite a piece of this district, for example, if we knew we were behind a deadline, could we change that part of that project to administrative review, or no?
You'd have to make that decision with a development agreement. With this code update, we'd have to either go the full Monty or with building height and administrative review. That'd be preferable.
Thank you.
So for planning staff, if there's a project that needs to happen quickly, and they understanding that there's still the 45-day comment period, are you able to meet that comment period but still put something towards the front of the list for the planning commission? Can you make those arrangements? Do you feel like we have the resources to be able to do that right now?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
And that means capacity too. Like, I know we've got big things happening in Sugar House. I know I've got big things coming in my North Point area, right? Like, I know just in disparate corners, it would be a heavy season without this on the city's plate. So in terms of capacity, I mean, I know that you're good at going, okay, statutorily we have to meet this deadline, but are we shortchanging the rest of the city and attention to the rest of the city? We have been promising everyone that this is not a line that we're drawing around one special area that's going to get improved and everything else languishes. So I want to be sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot inadvertently here with this.
If we get complete submittal requirements, we will be able to process this in a timely fashion. Absolutely.
Madam Chair, I know that there's a lot of processes that hopefully combined will ensure success for this project. And one that I'm still not entirely sure what it'll look like is the development agreement step, which I guess happens at a later date. Is there a way that we say, for now we're comfortable moving forward with what Councilmember Dugan proposed, but if the development agreement comes back and has enough specificity that we feel like that additional planning commission step is not needed, we could go through and remove that in the development agreement itself without having to go through this whole process again? Because I'm hopeful that the development agreement is going to give us the specificity that we need, and we don't need it through the zoning tool, but I haven't seen draft of that. I don't know if a draft of that exists. And so I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for us to, and I guess this is maybe a question for the applicant as well, like go forward with that now at this step, but indicate, at least I guess I'll indicate that I would be willing to remove that in the development agreement if the development agreement can include other level of specificity that makes me comfortable not having the planning commission step. I'm just worried about taking away that tool now, not knowing what will come in the development agreement.
I
definitely
actually
understand.
You have articulated something that would make me very comfortable. Thank you for articulating that.
And but I want to also be clear, we could do that with any project. What Councilmember Mono just laid out.
His proposal was, how I understand it, is we can keep with the Planning Commission design review, but if council becomes very comfortable with all of the details that SEG provides you, hopefully in short order, through the development agreement, you still have an option to switch to administrative review.
Right, and we have that ability to do that now with any other as well. So my point here is, I'm trying not to say these rules apply to everybody else and this is an SEG rule. These rules apply to across the board. We can still do this in our current state right now. Go forward with what we're just talked about, my straw poll, and what Councilmember Monos clearly pointed out, that hey, if we are comfortable with this development agreement, we can make this an administrative step. That's no change to our current policies and written. I think that's wonderful comment, and I of course I agree with that. So thank you.
I would just add a final comment. You know, there's a lot of residents in the downtown that are affected by this that are concluding we are eliminating their voice from any future developments. That's pretty important to me that we include them in this process. So I'll be voting in favor of the straw poll, unless it's changed, Dan, but I just want to let my colleagues know, this is something that, although other development agreements could be entered with other entities, it is still a unique process.
If I may add, and I'll ask the attorneys to correct me, the development agreement will be going through, we'll go through the process of negotiating it, but then itself, it would be reviewed by the Planning Commission and then go to the council for final approval. So the public would be able to chime in on any of those standards and conditions during that process.
So it's like Councilmember Romano said, if there's a level of specificity there, then we'll be able to. I don't, and I'll be transparent, I don't know that I will ever get to a place where any, especially a building that is a height that we have yet to see in our city, I don't know that I'll ever get to a place where I want that approved without it going through as many constituents as possible. But for, if there's a dozen other buildings that are gonna be regular order for us, I just don't know that that's, for me, the best allocation of our time and energy, if we can meet those terms that Councilmember Mono specified. So then the straw poll is?
Straw poll is at 200 feet, 600 feet maximum, 200 feet design review as the current process stands, and the comments that Councilmember Mono stated, which are part of our normal process at this point.
Perfect. Let's show your feelings. All right. That's 6 with Hui absent.
Okay, the next one would be to allow exceeding the established maximum front yard setback for the purpose of adding plazas or other similar type uses.
Do we need to discuss this? I feel. All right, someone want to call the question?
I support that. I mean, I propose a straw poll that we support that.
Show your feelings. That's unanimous approval.
Thank you. The next one is step backs from adjacent properties and uses. The example that's been used is the Japanese Church of Christ. Planning has recommended, so the council asked planning to come back with some potential recommendations on what those could be. Planning's recommendation is that because this is such a unique situation, that it would be better addressed through the development agreement.
Council, any feedback on that?
Can you repeat? Well, I'm not sure I heard that before.
The example that I think the council discussed during July was the Japanese Church of Christ, with the new development potentially being right on the back. What could be done to help mitigate that additional height next to them?
Madam Chair.
And so the conclusion to that issue that we raised back in July is that the development agreement will be the strongest tool for protecting that in terms of step backs and setbacks. Councilmember Mono?
Madam Chair, I'm okay with that. I just, it does make sense for it to not be in the zoning text and to be in the development agreement because that's specific to this parcel. I'll just indicate for the record right now that that's going to be a really high priority when it comes to us approving the development agreement. So it's going to be a non-negotiable for me at that step. But it seems like the applicant's willing to go with that, so I will go along with planning. So my proposal is that we go with planning's suggestion of leaving it out of the zoning text amendment, but indicating that we want it in the development agreement.
All right, everyone share your feelings on Councilmember Mono's proposal? All right, that's unanimous with Pui absent.
Okay, thank you. The next one is sign regulation, sign standards. So there was a discussion about on-premise versus off-premise, and the council, I think, made it pretty clear that off-premise advertising you were not comfortable including at this point. That is essentially billboards, and there are other discussions occurring around potential billboard amendments, so you felt that would be the proper way to handle those. You're open to, once those discussions are happening and we're moving forward with them, considering this area, but until those discussions are finalized, you weren't comfortable allowing those yet. In terms of the on-premise, the idea was raised about, I guess we're calling it reciprocity between the blocks. So the Delta Center could advertise events or activities for events and activities occurring 2 blocks away over on the Salt Palace blocks. The council indicated some support for that. And so there is language in there that would allow that. And the question is the council okay with that language?
Council members? There's no off-premises, but a Bravenel Hall and Delta Center can pump
It's
each other
considered
up.
on premise. Wasn't there also some discussion about does like a sponsor, like a title sponsor of an entity on premise count as an on premise advertisement as opposed to just like someone that paid for a advertising spot? Like there's somehow a difference between that. Do we have any clarification on that?
I'll go.
Because I guess I'll say I would be supportive of saying that if it's like a title sponsor of an entity that is housed on site, we can call that an on-premise advertisement, as opposed to just for my law firm I went and
Like
bought.
a concert
Sold on
presented
site.
by Toyota, not just a Toyota advertisement.
Yes, Toyota, like whatever company is sponsoring an event that is on site, to me that would be okay to consider on-premise advertising, as opposed to my business just paid X number of dollars to get a 30-second spot up there.
Yeah.
If there's a way to thread that needle, I'm open to it.
Yeah, I go back to our discussion we had about this, and there is a lot of, I'll just use the word angst about the billboard side, on-premise, off-premise, and the type of signage across the board. I know SEG provided a list of different signages, but we really don't have a definition of those signages in our ordinance. So this would also be part of the development agreement. Is that true? So I'd really like to see, I'm in favor of the conversation continuing, but I'd like to see a little more clarity in what Councilmember Mana was just talking about, the sponsorship, go back to the dwell time, the light brightness and those things, and how that's going to read in the development agreement. I'm open to more discussion on this, but I want to see what it looks like more than where we are right now in the conversation. So I'm not really.
No, you're exactly right. That's what we're voting on today, is what we want to see in the development agreement, not worrying about the specifics at this point. The development agreement stage is now. So.
That's right.
So you're exactly right to give that feedback right now.
So is that the straw poll?
So the proposed language does have language regarding dwell time and twirl time.
Yeah.
That would be included in there.
Okay. So as long as we have that in that development agreement, then I think I'm good with that. That's it.
Sorry, in the existing ordinance that would be adopted. You could also address it further in the development agreement, but there will be some basic standards written in the D4 ordinance.
Okay.
For the sign overlay, not just the D4
Yeah,
ordinance.
excuse me.
Yeah.
If they're in the arts part of this district were to be some sort of like, I don't know, let's call it like an immersive art experience, similar to Meow Wolf, would that be allowed to be in the advertising?
If it was on those blocks.
Yeah.
That overlay, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, anywhere
Or what if-
within those blocks.
Or
can
in
be
the culture, adjacent in the cultural core.
Yeah, as long as it has some piece in that block area, it could be advertised on any of the signs in that block area in that overlay.
It would have to be within that legal description in the overlay.
Okay. I
Once
think that
our
would be really
billboard,
cool.
but once the billboard ordinance is completed, the point of this is just not to undermine the hard work that's been done on our billboard ordinance. So once the billboard ordinance is completed, and we are in progress on that, then they would potentially have access to all of those things that we decide in our billboard ordinance, and we could potentially expand this, right? That will be something else that's available to us at a later date.
I mean, the billboard could even be part of the immersive art experience in some way, if they were.
I don't hate it.
If that was possible, and
there are lots of creative people in the world. So
thank you.
I think there's still, again, there's still that balance between, do we want to be New York City, Las Vegas, or do we want to still be, have a different flow, different vibe of this area for Salt Lake City? And I don't know what that balance looks like, and I'm probably not conceptualizing it that well, but you know, we could go to one level, or we could go to a full dark sky, and there's a fine line there for Salt Lake City and an entertainment district for that's a Salt Lake City vibe compared to a LA, Vegas, New York vibe of 42nd Street. So I want to make sure that we still have that discussion, and so that we're on the same vision trajectory of this area.
Well,
I don't
we're
want
really
to
fortunate to be entering the conversation at a time when technology gives us so much optionality and control over things. It's not that the light is on or the light is off. There's a lot of different things.
Exactly.
So I think, you know, in the development agreement or in the ordinance, wherever it belongs most appropriately, I would like to see specificity around some of those tools that we know are going to be at our disposal. But I would also contend that LA, Las Vegas, and New York City all have their own vibes. It's how we use this tool within the culture that we're creating. It's not going to make us one thing or another, you know, but just making sure that it's respective of our principles and values, like you said.
Yeah.
All right, so did someone want to call this question? Nick, would you remind us what the core question that we're answering right now is?
So my understanding of the conversation is yes to those, including the standards like twirl, dwell, brightness times in the overlay. Yes on allowing sponsors within like the team or facility list, so that it's not too broad, but it does allow for that. And then yes to the general sign overlay proposal, the boundaries. And
Does anyone want to call that question?
I propose a straw poll of what Nick just said.
Share your feelings. All right, that's unanimous with Pui absent.
okay, I think that's all we had, unless you guys have anything else. There is a public hearing tonight that the public is welcome to chime in on. And then we will get the draft ordinance ready and sent back to the council for review and potential action on August 27th.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
Make a quick comment. I just want to say, this is one more step in this process that feels super accelerated, and I think for all parties involved, maybe very stressful at times. But I'm really excited for hopefully what this means for downtown, and I just wanted to say thank you for Smith Entertainment Group for investing in the city and keeping the jazz here, and understanding how great this project could be.
Thank you. All right, let's move on then to item number 4, which is a Green Loop update. We're going to invite Rachel Otto, Chief of Staff, to the table, Nancy Monteith, Senior Landscape Architect, and the representatives from Wank Consultants will be here as well.
No.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
I'll have to step out for CIP.
I believe they're grabbing the mayor quickly.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. Since we're waiting on the mayor, can we take a quick 5? I could use a quick potty break.
Okay.
Okay, so we will reconvene at 4:10, please. Thank addition to the council people here at the dais, we have Councilmember Pui joining us online right now. So welcome, Councilmember Pui. With that, I will turn the time over to the mayor and her team.
Thank you, Council Chair. Thanks for giving me a minute to kick off this subject that we are so excited to bring to you and begin this work in earnest together that focuses on the Green Loop, which is the culmination really of 15 years of talk about creating a downtown park-like connected experience. And that's reflected in 2 of our plans as a city already, but that really started 15 years ago. And in my decade or so in this room as a council person and now as mayor, I remember years ago when we set money aside as a city council to acquire land to build a park downtown, and that money sat and sat and sat and was eventually reallocated because there isn't the land available in the private realm or in the public realm outside of our streets. And this is also the neighborhood in the central city that has some of the worst ratio for access to open space and park space for any residents in the city. And you'll hear more about those details from our team in a minute. But it's also the area where we have our most rapidly growing population, thanks to really visionary zoning and planning efforts that are not only looking at expanding density in a footprint that's already built out, but building family-focused density. So the council has supported the prioritization of family-sized housing, expansion of daycare facilities in downtown and throughout the city, the transit implementation for all of our school kids, a parent, and all of our teachers, and looking for ways to expand play spaces, especially in our downtown core where we're growing. The Green Loop brings all of those things together, but it does so in a way that isn't just about our families and our residents today. It's about the economy of our future and about building an integrated network of livability for the future of downtown for the next century. This is what we will want to live by. It'll be the place that you want to go after work. It'll be the place that you can take your dog. And as you know very well, there are more households with dogs in Salt Lake City than there are with children. But for whether it's dogs, kids, or people without either, the Green Loop is a space that will connect all of us. It also takes advantage of streets and public utility infrastructure that needs rebuilding anyway. It also can take advantage of private investment that is looking to expand access to amenities like what is possible in the Green Loop, but doesn't have the land to do so on the developments that they're creating and are interested in helping us make these investments happen in the city. So I'm enthusiastic about this. I'm really enthusiastic that we're on your agenda today, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if you could go to the next slide, I'll just talk quickly through hopefully what you already know. I don't think we're in charge of slides, but thank you. The vision encircles our downtown with about 60 acres of new park space and over 5 miles of linear park development. Our team has been working on this alignment, and we're happy to talk you through it over the course of this discussion, but it is in proximity to most of the population density development that's happening in the central neighborhoods. Go on to the next slide if you would. And I just want to leave off with you on the guiding principles that have been developed. They've really been confirmed through the last couple of years and 2 separate engagement rounds that we did with the community. But these are themes that you're familiar with because they're the themes of guiding principles that our community has been telling us they want to see in the spaces we invest in and the spaces we create. And these are solidified as our guiding principles for the development of the Green Loop. Stormwater management, native plantings, family-friendly design, lots of plazas and social space, active transportation connectivity, and the potential for thousands and thousands of new trees of full canopy size in our downtown core. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our project team, Nancy Monteith, who you know well with our Salt Lake City Public Lands Department, and followed by our visionary consultants with Wink Associates, who are in from Denver to join us today. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Madam Chair and council members, thank you so much for having us here today to sort of see our progress on this project in preparation of the CIP discussions that are coming shortly thereafter. Next slide. So the mayor mentioned that this idea has been around for 15 years. It was first described in the Downtown Rising Plan. It was a plan produced by the chamber. And what you see here is the green loop is not an isolated project for just one project area. It is to connect the entire city, east and west, and north and south, to create green corridors for moving through, and it's both a destination and a linkage. Many of these areas on the plan are in progress. The Folsom Trail is funded for construction. We have capital funding for the Jordan River Trail. 9th South, those transportation elements have been implemented, but we still need to do the greening. We haven't yet touched the downtown core green loop sections. Since that time, though, these concepts in the green loop has been included in 2 adopted plans by name, and the idea has been developed further, both in the downtown plan as a key element to making downtown livable, and in Reimagine Nature as a key way to add that critically needed green space to the city. Master plans can capture a community vision and set direction for the city, but we knew right away that in order to take the next step, we needed to understand the full technical and operational challenges to produce building something like this in the right-of-way. And that's why our first step was really developing a prototype for 200 East and understanding how we knit it into our urban form. Next slide. At first glance, this aerial looks black and white, and that green is hard to find. It's Pioneer Park, Washington Square. You can see it in the surrounding neighborhoods, but the core of downtown really lacks that space and that relief from the urban heat island. As we said, we learned downtown has the highest needs for park access and quantity, and since that study, we've added nearly 4,000 units. It has less than half the level of service of the citywide average. Only 30% are within a 5-minute walk of green space. Some of the last 2 stats, 1.9% of the downtown land cover is public green space. Now, a city like Portland is more in the neighborhood of 6%. And we only have 6% tree canopy downtown. The only 2 planning areas that have less tree canopy are the airport and the northwest quadrant. Next slide. So I think one of the things we tend to think green space or trees are a luxury. They're nice if we can afford them and if we can fit them in. But I think what this slide really shows is that they are critical infrastructure for livability. And this map came out of Salt Lake City participated in a national heat watch campaign and came to Salt Lake City, facilitated measuring, took up to 50,000 measurements, morning, midday, and night to put together this map. You can see downtown is some of the reddest areas on the map, along with the industrial areas along I-15. I think only, if you think about your walk to this building, that walk through the middle of Library Square with that unshaded unshaded hardscape is like over 90% of downtown, and the block that we are on is more like only 2%. Less than 2% of downtown has mature trees, shade, and canopy. Another thing, so you also can find that there is up to 15 degrees temperature variation between being in the full sun and in
a green area with full mature canopy, which is dramatic and can make the difference for being outside, recreating, or even at risk. The other thing I wanted to quickly point out is all of that hardscape really magnifies the stormwater. And we tend to have a lot of flash storm events on 200 East and 500 West, these areas that are high priorities for us to add that green. So the green space and the trees, they take that storm rider right where it falls. It transforms into that green canopy, and it makes our city a more resilient place. Next slide, please. The green loop would dramatically improve the access to green space. That's proximity and quantity. Our needs assessments told us that the top 2 reasons people use the park that they do is it's close to home and it has mature trees. Adding 94 acres of green space is no small task. So really taking the right-of-way that we already own and taking that underutilized space and transforming it into other uses provides so many benefits for our downtown and the city. We can also make big progress towards just adding that needed acreage. Next slide, please. Connect Salt Lake City, the citywide transportation plan that was just adopted by the City Council, emphasizes the importance of building networks for active transportation. It's one of 8 key moves. The Green Loop really knits together these loose ends of our growing trails and bikeway network in and through downtown, connecting east and west as well as north and south. The tree canopy and shade is identified as a key transportation infrastructure for both walking and biking. The Urban Forest Action Plan. The Green Loop will bring this downtown. Next slide, please. So this is an image of 500 West. You could say the pedestrian realm or not. We have a lone walker here. So a lot of our work we've done to date is on 200 East. And why are we bringing 500 West to the table? This is really to talk about the whole priorities of the Green Loop, and 500 West and 200 East are 2 top priorities for implementation. We focused on 200 East because it's the core of downtown. It's where a lot of development has already happened. But 500 West is on the brink of an enormous amount of development. And those developers, when they embark on their project, they're required to upgrade the utilities and replace the right-of-way. And we would like to see them do that consistent with the vision of the Green Loop. And so there's a real opportunity to look at this section, and what we're asking specifically is with the CIP funding that we have for your review, is that funding would support design so we can answer the developers when they ask the question, where should we put the utilities, where should we put the curb, where should we put these green space improvements? And with that, I'll turn it over to Nicole with Wank Associates. And the one thing I wanted to say again about the 200 East design is that it's really a prototype. What we've learned on 200 East applies to every leg of the Green Loop. It also provides a lot of guidance for any street that would include significant greening. So with that.
Thanks, Nancy. Next slide. And next slide. Thanks. Nancy just showed 500 West, and now we're looking at 200 East there. And when we started this, we really started thinking about how to do a paradigm shift, where today there's 70% of roadway. Could we flip that so it's 70% of greenway and public space, providing comfortable places for people to walk and bike and keeping one lane in each direction for vehicles to drive. And throughout the process, and I'll come back to this, we kept asking ourselves, is it worth it? Can we get enough green space to truly make this worth it? So if you go to the next slide, we studied economic successes of other cities who added greenways and how those opportunities might apply in the future to Salt Lake City. And what we found was that pedestrians and cyclists spend as much or more at local businesses than motorists. In Indianapolis, at the Indianapolis Cultural Trail, they saw $3.56 million in annual spending by trail users. The Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston saw more than 1.7 million visitors along their 17-acre greenway, and they host 400 free events downtown. So it's not just about green space, but it's about tourism and creating that livability in places for people to have active space. The Indianapolis Cultural Trail also saw over 6 years, $1 billion in increased property values within 500 feet of the trail. So when you look at Salt Lake City, there's 34% of vacant land downtown, so the possibilities are there, the potential is there for some of this economic potential. So next slide. We had an incredible community engagement process. We had very positive feedback. There was a pop-up event last May. We had 2 online surveys with over 1,000 people responding. We had walking and biking tours. We went out into the street with public utilities, and they brought their vac truck out and showed us the constraints that they were dealing with to be able to get maintenance to the manholes, and really stressed to us that if we're going to do this, we've got to be able to get to the utilities underground. Next slide. So we working with all of those city departments was imperative. The right-of-way has many departments that are stewards, and they have different objectives that don't always align with each other. And so we worked very diligently to understand those and find ways to make it work. The executive leadership team was instrumental in facilitating our discussions and thinking about the long-term success of the project, not just how do you get it built, but then when it's built, how do you maintain it and operate it? So next slide. Early on in the process, we put together this chart, and there is a lot on here, a lot to kind of digest, but I'll explain to you what it is. The top shows the 8 departments that have ownership in the right-of-way, and then the future roles and responsibility are on the left-hand side of the screen. And we identified the conflicts, the gaps, the overlap of those different departments, and that there might be benefits to simplify this when the Green Loop comes on, and put together a report that identified it could be multiple departments that are managing it in the future. It could be one entity, it could be one department, and kind of setting that stage for really thinking about the long-term success. Next slide. And then the next slide. Sorry. We really focused on 200 East, and like Nancy said, the strategies that we learned can apply to other corridors along the Green Loop. And the next slide, we looked at the 2 prototypes, and one was a center aligned that was a 2-way street that bracketed green space in the middle, so kind of like a center median. And the other one was an asymmetric alignment, or a west aligned is what we called it, as we were looking at 200 East, where there's more green space on one side. And for 200 East, that alignment really yielded more green space, a denser tree canopy, and aligned with those goals that earlier. The 2-lane street provided better access for regular maintenance and repair of the utilities. But really, as you look at the other corridors, either one of these alignments could work. So next slide. And like I said, we did continually ask ourselves, is this worth it? Could we get the 70% of public space and green space and bring more of an urban forest downtown, stormwater management, the high quality bike facilities. And so there you kind of see a before after of what we were going for. And the next slide is another kind of visionary image of that identity of the green loop of bringing walkability and native plant material and shade to downtown. Next slide. There were two main things that we really needed to reconcile in the right-of-way, the utilities and fire. We were able on 200 East to keep the utilities in place. That was a big concern of public utilities, is not having the funding to be able to relocate what's underground. And we worked with providing accommodations to move manholes for access, to provide root barrier. Trees were closer than 10 feet, and providing a structural profile near the 20-inch water line. There is also, which you don't see in this image, a lot of private utilities that are running underneath the roadway. And what we were proposing for that is when they are in conflict, a private utility vault. And you see that in the center that's running underneath the roadway, where the overhead electrical would go in that, and any utilities, private utilities that were in conflict with trees. For the next slide, we met with the fire department several times and worked with them to propose what we're calling a fire engine plaza that can have multifunctional use. So aerial access on the northern blocks where the buildings are more than 30 feet tall, they need to be able to get a fire truck close enough to those buildings to put their rigging equipment down. What you see in this image is trying to minimize the scale of those plazas. So the fire truck would drive underneath those catenary lights there, and then you have a 26-foot wide area for the laydown that's utilizing the bike lane and a change in pavement material that could have cafe seating, it could have movable games, it could have a lot of different things that would be coordinated with the adjacent building. And then the next slide, answering my question, is it worth it and can we do it? With our 30% design, we got 66% of green space and bike lanes and sidewalks. 44% of that is green space and open space, and 22% is bike lanes and sidewalks. So it has more than doubled the 28% that's on 200 East today. And the next slide, I'll just quickly go through. We provided drawings for all 9 blocks of 200 East that are similar to this. And again, this is a slide that's probably hard to read, but what the red is designating are places for community spaces. And the program would be worked out through future design, but identifying those areas that have large enough space to have play areas or stormwater gardens or other things. In the next slide, you see some of those images of what that might be. So a play area in the lower left, a place to sit along a stone outcropping surrounded by native plant material or cafe seating. And the next slide, we also looked at the civic block, and that block is very different than the other 8 blocks on 200 East. And you can see in this image, we really wanted to accommodate the large events as well as improving the day-to-day gathering experiences, looking at the key considerations that were part of the 2017 ULI panel. Those are the goals that are listed there. And the way that we propose doing that is creating park-like uses on both ends of the block and then open space in the middle, creating a drive lane on the Washington Square side. And so the next slide, we looked at how taking the event plans and putting that into the design, and could you still get those large events here? And we were able to do that. And the roadway, I know there's a lot of discussion. Could it be closed? Could it be one way? Could it be 2-way? And the design leaves a lot of flexibility to make any of those work. So those discussions can happen as the plan moves forward. And then the last slide, the costs. We worked with an estimator on our 30% design, as well as looking at precedent studies locally. And what we were coming up with is about 9 to 10 million per block for 200 East. And that's kind of in line with what we were seeing in other places. It's a lot, but I think when we look at how the project can break down by how much is street reconstruction, green space, active transportation, there's a lot of opportunities for funding mechanisms in that. So, Nancy?
Great. So now it's next steps in the. I think some of the things to keep in mind is the city is already obligated to reconstructing those 2 streets. So it's how do we do it, and what additional funding, how can we build more benefits? The next slide, I just want to go through, we talked about, again, the 200 East study, and the conclusion of that is the 30% design, and that is to get these cost estimates, to really understand the technical requirements, and to go further, we would ask for more money for implementation and get more detailed with the adjacent land users to develop and confirm those gathering spaces and to work closely with the stakeholders at the civic block to refine that design. Another thing that we're still in progress to finish is some technical analysis. We're looking at 500 West in North and South Temple to understand those underground utilities and any other constraints that would inform where the green space would occur above ground. And that will inform future efforts. We're also finalizing the routes in that northwest corner. So getting from, say, North or South Temple to the Front Runner Station, that's a critical connection to tie the loop into this regional transportation elements. We'll continue to work with UDOT on State Street on that corridor connection, and then exploring management and operations. And I think circling back on all of these things are very much in progress, including putting together, we realize that new approaches to funding both the capital and the operations funding is going to be needed. And we're really excited that the new senior advisor for real estate, Jesse Dean, is on board to help lead those conversations and bring his expertise to bear in this project. So that with that, we can open it up to the floor for questions.
Thank you, council members. Councilwoman Young.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of see the grand vision lined out. It's really helpful. And it's definitely something that, as a vision, really resonates with me, related to especially addressing some of the inequities in terms of access to parks and open space, as well as making sure that we have a forward-facing plan for creating opportunities for it to be more family-friendly in our downtown area, especially ahead of major efforts like the Olympics. With that said, I think one of the pieces that I'm going to continue to look for more information about is going to be related to how we are staging this comprehensively across the Green Loop. And my why probably isn't going to come as a surprise, but it has to do with the current experiences that my residents are facing on 2100 South. So for a host of different reasons, there has been a flurry of effort related to making improvements that are necessary on that particular corridor. And a lot of pre-planning and timing just was negatively impacted by the pandemic and other areas. With that noted, we're just seeing really hard times related to especially our businesses. And I just want to be sure that as the city looks forward to a comprehensive plan, that we're taking into account some of those potential impacts when we're designing a comprehensive stage and resourcing of those areas. It's really heartening to see the alignment of right-of-way across departments to make sure that if we're going to be disrupting our residents and our businesses, businesses with development, that we're doing it with an attention to the utilities, to fire, to the streetscape, and making sure that all of those pieces, as much as possible, can happen at the same time, so that we're not kind of revisiting the same area over and over and creating those disruptions. As a council member, I want to make sure as well that we have the funding necessary for that. Our administration was great in identifying some gaps that we had in my district related to the 2100 project, and I really appreciated their quick thinking and solutions. As much as we can get ahead of that to not put the city in that space, I'm interested in. And so I want to say again, comprehensively, lots of support for this. Would love to continue the conversation related to the needs for logistics and funding. And because I highlighted them, I just have to say 2100 South is ahead of schedule. And that is really thanks to a lot of the amazing work across the city departments. So I want to just use those lessons learned to help inform our future actions in the city.
Councilmember Young, if I may. My name is Jesse Dean. I was the one who was just saying hi. In week 2, we've already solved all of the funding and planning around this project, so it's good to go. Oh, just kidding. But in all seriousness, we recognize that it's really important to kind of get aligned both on financing strategies as well as operations and maintenance. And I think we really want to take it in a systematic way as it relates to in the implementation as well. Obviously, this is a very massive undertaking, and from a block-by-block perspective, will have its own unique challenges. And I think we're taking that as it relates to both the financing and operations as well.
Madam Chair, since Councilmember Young started with construction concerns, I guess my question is, what happens on 9th South, which just also went through a lot of construction? To what extent can we reuse what we've done there? And I know that the design to date has focused on 2nd East, but I've been wondering, what does this actually mean for 9th South? It just got completely done. Granted, the landscaping is not great and needs improvement, but
we are actively
do you have an idea
looking,
of that?
Well, so 9th South, in thinking about the whole phasing of the project, 9th South is obviously lower on the list because that road just got reconstructed, but there is space for trees. And we are actively looking for funding to add that greening to 9th South.
So would the vision of the Green Loop largely work with the way the hardscape is already done on 9th South? We would just enhance the landscaping? Is that sort of the idea right now?
In the near term. And I think Becca's going to add some information.
Yeah, Becca Rolfe, Transportation. In the long run, it's a possibility that 9th South could recover some additional space from hardscape and turn it to green space, possibly by working with public utilities, and it's technically complicated, so would need to be studied, but potentially to add a daylighting of the stormwater culvert that runs underneath 9th South could potentially turn into a middle of the street landscape median. Would need to be studied further. In thinking about potential phasing, that would be like the very last piece of the green loop that we would approach most likely, whereas adding greening within the existing framework of 9th South as just reconstructed would be something that I would love to do as soon as possible if we had money.
Please.
So
I would love for that as well.
And we did not submit a funding request including that this year because of the urgency with regard to 5th West and taking advantage of the opportunities there.
And my second question, if it's all right, Madam Chair, is it strikes me as so I'm excited about this. I like the vision. I am trying to decide in my brain whether this is something that like people are going to run through the loop, or you just go to one part of the loop and do something, and it's more of is it a path or a destination? And the reason I'm asking is because it seems important how you get across large roads, like specifically the Grand Boulevards, and I'm thinking of that 5th West area and wondering if it's a path and we're trying to go through the green loop, would there be any rationale to, at least where the Grand Boulevards are bumping over to 6 West, where you can go underneath the freeway and not have to stop for traffic, rather than having to deal with 8 lanes of traffic to cross that? I don't know if
Yeah,
there's
I
an
think-
answer to that, but
I would say the Green Loop is both a linkage and a destination. It operates on both. And so there are many places to stop. You might go right outside your front door. You might use it to get somewhere. So it acts as both. With 500 West and 6 South specifically, we would need to look at some alternatives because that's a really tricky connection, either over or around. And I think that's there's a lot of opportunity with that.
I mean, I think 500 West makes perfect sense once you get up to the gateway that's already got
Yes.
a nice big green space there. And so I see why 5th West was chosen, but the 5th and 6th South seems like a really big problem to cross there. But again,
It could
maybe
be a
I'm getting too
key
in the weeds.
signature moment getting across that
bridge or
with
something.
a bridge, a gateway.
Councilmember Dugan?
You know where I'm going on that answer.
Very everything.
Everything.
So I thank you very much. I love the presentation and I love the vision because when you go to other cities that have these loops and you see them and you use them, it's wonderful. And when you talked about, is this a destination or is this a way to get around? I always say it's both, because I've been in cities where this is a great 5-mile loop if you want to run it. It's pretty flat, so you can get a basic run in, bike ride in, walk in, but you can also use it to get someplace also without going to the heat side. So I love that vision, and I love the idea of working the 200, and after our discussions of working the 500 West. My only request when we talk about the 500 West is that this is a large swath of asphalt right now. I mean, it is a wide street, and it has a lot of utilities underground that we have the right of way on. And I know that's a complicated piece no matter what we do with it. I just want to make sure that we're still open to other options if they come available for that stretch from 1 North to 9 South or so. So, and I think I understand also why we want to make sure that we have put some guardrails on for the developers there to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel when they have to redig it up. So I appreciate the discussions we have. I just want to make sure that we're keeping our eyes wide open on all the different options and are able to adjust at different points.
Councilwoman Lopez Chavez.
Hey, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm quite excited for this for the reasons that were mentioned, which is the downtown and District 4 don't have a lot of green space currently. I'm most excited about the civic block, so I do want to signal my support for that. I do have concerns about 500 West still and the utilization, its pedestrian access. I think there's other places along Green Loop that are more ready or palpable for this type of investment to be achieved long term. But ultimately, I think this is something that echoes our master plans and what our community wants to see built in progression. So I'm really excited for this. I'm interested in looking at what other financial tools we have in existence that could help us pair with other existing projects. I'm also interested to see how we can thread Green Loop into some of our other capital projects in the downtown. I'm really acutely aware of, for example, our downtown, our Main Street revitalization plan. With $30.2 million, we could achieve a full pedestrian promenade in our downtown core. So I'd love to see how Green Loop can help us afford and create some of these other projects in the downtown.
I think it's our intention over the coming weeks and months to really come back to the council and continue the around maintenance and also how we fund each of these kind of areas. I think as it relates to 500 West, one of the pieces that we could come back with as well is just to show you the amount of investment that is occurring in that area and how we're planning on harnessing some of that opportunity. And I think it's not necessarily one versus the other, but just trying to make some incremental progress as it relates to each of the.
Councilmember Wharton, and then Councilmember Pui is online.
So I also have a little bit of traffic concern just about the North Temple stretch, because that's already can be really congested on 2 particular times a year. And so I would want to know more about that, if there's going to be, and I say that I want the, I like the option that is more on North Temple as opposed to the one that goes down to First South. So I want to find a solution to that, but I'm already worried about how gridlocky that can be in that area. So that's one area where I'm going to be looking for a lot more detail. And I am interested in like how that option would work because of the bridge that starts right there. Like the bridge starts on North Temple. You start going up the bridge on 4th West. So like how would you connect that top corner, that northwest corner? But so yeah, some logistical questions with that area, which you don't have to answer right now, or you can if you want. And then my other concern is I definitely still see the need for this. I see this filling a lot of the gaps that the mayor identified and that I've seen on my time on the council as well. I want to make sure though that right now we're also having a conversation about maintenance of public spaces, and I don't want to have to sacrifice one to pick the other, and because if I do, I think that the more prudent thing is to pick the thing that you already have and that needs to be taken care of, and I don't want us to have to be in that position. So I want to feel really good about a really strong plan to maintain this as it comes online and as it grows, and that it's not going to be we're not pitting that against our existing deferred maintenance projects with our public lands.
Since Councilmember Wharton was okay waiting, can I let Councilmember Pui go? He's got some schedule constraints that might, so if you don't mind. All right, Councilmember Pui.
Thank you for letting me jump the line. Quick question. I noticed that in the presentation, you guys talked about the technical and operational challenges within the departments. Within the city itself, and how to create something this big with minimizing the impacts on the community. Did you look at technical and operational challenges within the city? I know that there was a slide that showed us a little bit about the connection between the departments and maybe the gaps. But beyond that, do you look into how many more employees we need to be hiring for this gigantic, massive investment? And it's a big important piece of the equation, I think. And when we talked about maintenance, at the same time, we are struggling, as mentioned before me, right now, maintaining the current spaces we have. Unfortunately, we made some mistakes recently, killing some trees. We have this deferred maintenance that is looming over us as well. So I just want to know if your study looked into that a specific point regarding of the need for employees and how many of those we need in the future.
That's a great question, Councilmember Pui. I think we haven't really decided what exact direction we are going as it relates to the operations and maintenance model of the Green Loop. Wank did some great work for us initially, trying to provide some initial criteria of what that could look like, whether it would be a fully public model or a public-private model, or even more of like a partnership model where we would essentially a nonprofit partner or essentially create a new conservancy. I think we have a lot of work to do to be able to kind of get to that level of detail, and that I think would be beneficial for the Green Loop. But I think right now that's a great question, and if we were to do it at a fully public model, we would have to look at the right resources to staff it.
Yeah, and just to follow up to that, I would love to learn more about what direction you're going. Obviously, I want to see the commitments. I heard about private commitments before that never came to fruition, but I would love to see where you guys go. I love that our city is dreaming big, and this is the sort of dream that many in our city are looking forward to. So thank you.
Thank you. And did you want to respond to anything for Councilmember Wharton? Thank you.
Yes, I can take those, Councilmember. So as far as the routing, as well as your questions about traffic in North Temple, those are all things that are part of what we're looking at currently in a study mode, and will ultimately need more funding to do the full level of conceptual design similar to what we've done on Second East. We have just been working with UDOT, an agency that tends to be very traffic sensitive, shall we say. And UDOT and Salt Lake City Transportation have together come to a design concept for State Street, that key block of State Street between North Temple and South Temple, to make that connection that accomplishes the green loop. A minimal design, mostly just a active transportation connection, a multi-use path, but it satisfies the traffic sensitivity that UDOT has. So I think that with some creative thinking, we can find the space, or we can figure out if there's alternative routes or how all of those things fit together. That's absolutely something we will look at. The second question that you posed that I wanted to address is that very northwest corner and the bridge on North Temple. And one piece is making a connection to the Front Runner station, and that is probably in the form of going under the bridge with the Folsom Trail. And then exactly how that northwest corner comes together is a little bit still to be determined, which is in a way great because it gives us an opportunity to also include the sports, entertainment, culture and convention district as part of that discussion, and making the connections for potentially their clientele as well.
One of the blocks I'm worried about is the one between Main and State, but also the one between 2nd and 3rd, because that gets really full for people going up on the freeway from Temple Square area right there. But I think it makes sense too, because between West Temple and 2nd, sorry, I'm getting really specific. I feel like Darren. Between West Temple and 2nd, there's like that undergrounding garage, and so it already protrudes into the street. Like if you could move like some of the island, move the island over, and I mean that makes sense to me. So there's like 2 big congestion points that I see, but I think you can work around them. So I hope that that's the route that gets picked, and that you solve those before you pick it.
No problem.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, so we're past time, so I'm going to make my comments quick. Conceptually, this is gorgeous, and our constituents deserve it, especially the constituency that's growing in District 4. I echo every concern about the execution of it. We live in Rose Park, and my son goes to Bryant Middle School, and it takes me as long during rush hour to get from my house to Bryant as it takes me to get all the way down to Sandy because of the highway during those hours. We have the Temple construction. 100 South has never gone all the way through. 200 South has been under construction. 300 South is condensed with bike lanes. We have no east-west connectivity right now, particularly in the northern portion of the city. So this is going to be intense. But secondarily, and I've mentioned this, so I don't feel bad putting it on the public record, we have not only a backlog of deferred maintenance, we have a backlog of properties that we own that constituents have been asking us about. And I want to be sure that our maintenance of this is sure, but that our maintenance of our entire portfolio is sure. One of the first things I learned about when I was on the campaign trail was Allen Park and the great concerns they have over there. We have the Jordan River Trail that needs tremendous attention, and I'm really feeling good about the direction that we're taking with that, combined between public lands, state partners, police. Things are coming along. But before I approve a lot more money to go to this for us to put shovels in the ground, make progress, I want assurances. I don't want, when constituents are going, why are you letting the green space that you committed to me languish? I don't want this to become adversarial to the rest of the city. I don't want this to become adversarial to completing the Glendale Regional Park, because I know there's still stuff left to do there. We have an $85 million GO bond that our constituency was amazing in approving. This is as much as that just for the first portion. So this is a stewardship question for me. So I'll be asking questions about stewardship of capacity, time, money, resources, and making sure that our service facing out to the constituencies who have been wanting to see movement on their projects have concrete answers for when they can expect that. And this isn't just us pushing the next thing before completing the last thing with excellence. So that's the nexus of my concerns, and no one in the administration needs to hear it again. But just putting it on the record so people know what to expect when I'm asking questions. All right. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. This has been amazing, and I look forward to the day that we can all hang out on the Green Loop together. Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to move on to item number 5, which is the fiscal year 24-25 budget for the CIP program follow-up. We're going to have Ben Lutke, Council Policy Analyst, at the table with us. Councilmember Pui, are you still online?
Yes.
I'm going to offer Ben some latitude in how he wants to help us walk through it, but knowing that your time might come to an end soon, would you like to present your priorities and concerns before we get too far into anything else?
I might not be able to.
Okay. All right. So then I'll defer to Ben and let him lead us.
Thank you.
I think there's 3 things to structure the briefing. I can begin with a review of Councilmember Pui's items while he's still with us. I know Councilmember Young also has an item to revisit. The other 2, it might be helpful if I review the potential funding scenario that's in the staff report as a reminder of which projects multiple council members have expressed interest in funding, especially since we haven't all been together for some of those briefings last month. And lastly, the council could finish reviewing the projects on the last few pages of the funding log. And if anybody needs a funding log, including anyone in the audience, we have extra copies on the corner in the big table. If that sounds good, I'll start with Councilmember Pui's items. And if we can get the funding log up on the screen, that would be great if you could follow along as we move through the discussion. And the first of Councilmember Pui's items, it is going to be number 20, so the previous page. The Memory Grove Parks Urgent Repairs and Preservation and Maintenance Plan. This is 10 different individual projects that are bundled together. That's why it's a high amount, $1.9 million. And 9 of the 10 are to make improvements to Memory Grove. The 10th item is the Preservation and Maintenance Plan. That's $160,000, and Councilmember Pui flagged that $160,000 to possibly shift to another project. The next is number 22 on the next page. Amplifying our Jordan River revitalization. This is $1.5 million, and this funding would be paired with the $9 million for the Jordan River corridor from the Parks Bond. The area in the project description to be focused with the $1.5 million is between Indiana Avenue down to California Avenue. That's about 8th South to 13th South. Councilmember Pui is suggesting that in the scope, the council identify the Fife wetlands as one of the priority areas within the scope. And there could also be an option to prioritize the International Peace Gardens. Both the Fife wetlands and the International Peace Gardens are already within that area of the Jordan River, but he was suggesting that they be prioritized within the scope. Then we'll jump to number 41. The council did briefly discuss this last month. There was 5 years ago a project to build a connecting corridor between the two buildings on the Sorensen Center campus. The $875,000 project, it has not moved forward and it is now canceled. So those funds, per the council's CIP policy, are to be recaptured and made available for new projects. Councilmember Pui is suggesting using most of those funds. It would be $807,000 to build traffic calming a few blocks down California Avenue. This would benefit most of the same students and families that use the Sorensen Center campus, but it would instead be the traffic calming project, number 41. And this is next to the Glendale Middle School, and I believe it's Mountain View Elementary School. The remaining $68,000 could go to other projects.
Could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, where is it from?
So the project from 5 years ago that was canceled, that was $875,000. So $807,000 of that would be shifted to fund number 41.
Like 2 blocks west.
Yeah. Basically, the goal is to, unfortunately, that project of reconnecting the two buildings at Sorensen didn't come to fruition. But that the goal was to help that community in Glendale. And last year we funded the study to understand the intersections right across the street from the Glendale, the two schools were there. So I'm proposing, if I get you guys' support, to shift that funding from that the connection in the two buildings that is not going to happen, into actually building what we study is the best intersection to keep our kids safe in Glendale, just a few blocks down the street.
But this isn't money that comes from somewhere else in the funding log. It comes from a different project that at the time the funding log was created, we didn't know that funding existed, or?
So
we're recapturing the money.
You would be recapturing the money. So you would have a follow-up step in a budget amendment, because that canceled project, the council did not recapture the funding as part of the annual budget.
Okay. So that doesn't include the other money that we've already straw polled last time.
There is $250,000 that you added to CIP in the annual budget above the mayor's recommendation. Then there's the $875,000 for the canceled project we just discussed. And there's also $1 million from several completed projects that were finished under budget.
Right. So all the funding that we see in the staff report currently, the 595, is still there. This is separate from that.
The funding scenario in the staff report, that includes all 3 of those pots. So if you add up the 595 and the $1.5 million, that is the 250,000 plus the canceled project plus the $1 million of completed projects. It's all 3.
So funding this one that Councilmember Pui wants doesn't impact the 595.
It's already included in the funding scenario in the staff report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If there's no other questions, the next one is number 48. And the council did discuss this, and a majority of council members expressed tentative support to fund the design as phase 1, the Fayette Avenue improvements between Washington Street and 200 West. The phase 1 design would be $80,000, and then in a future CIP cycle, this would return to you for construction funding. The next one is number 53, the International Peace Gardens. And as I mentioned earlier, for amplifying the Jordan River, number 22, you could identify in the project scope that the International Peace Gardens are a priority area for that funding, or you could look at funding the International Peace Gardens as this separate constituent project, number 53. Most of this project is to add security fencing all the way around the Peace Gardens. A smaller portion of it is educational signage and kiosks.
And is this the one, Ben, that we talked about, since fencing currently exists on half of it? Half of the fencing would qualify for parked impact fees. The
Correct.
other half would be dependent on this, on CIP.
Correct. Because only half of the park has the security fencing, putting in new fencing would not be an improvement. It's not impact fee eligible. So you would need half impact fees, parks impact fees, and the other half would need to come from the general fund.
And is that not comprehended possibility in the previous, the one where we talked about adding Fife wetlands and the Peace Gardens? Could this be comprehended in that one?
So the number 22, amplifying the Jordan River, 1.3 million of that is parks impact fees, and 200,000 is the capital maintenance. So it wouldn't be quite enough to fully fund the security fence, almost. It would likely need to tap into the cost overrun account, or it would come back to you in a budget amendment for a little more funding. The other option is the administration could be creative and use some of the bond funding with this CIP funding for the International Peace Gardens to make up that little gap in the security fence funding, because that is bond eligible.
Is CIP the only time we can direct park impact fees?
You have done it occasionally in budget amendments. You typically will do those for like property acquisitions because those can't always wait for CIP. But the council's preference has been to do it in CIP so that you have all the projects, all the funding, and maximum flexibility to look at the different needs. The two others I have from Councilmember Pui is number 75. This is planning and design for future CIP applications. You will have seen this in the CIP book, but it didn't have a description about what projects it would go to. So the council could say, you could fund it as recommended, and then departments would determine what projects receive the planning and design funding, so that when those CIP applications come to you, they have more confidence in what the cost estimates are because they've already done some of the planning and design work. If the council is interested, you could recapture this funding and use it for other projects and say, this is a funding tool that would be well paired with the capital asset plan, a 5-year or a 10-year CIP plan that the council would review and adopt annually, because then you have the confidence that that plan will identify your priority projects to receive this funding. A third option, you could put policy parameters around that funding this year, such as you want this funding to go to Vision Zero, traffic calming, and water conservation projects. And then the departments would determine which projects under those policy goals would receive the funding. So you can do any of those. In the funding log, there are several potential projects that transportation and public services provided. The total cost of those is well in excess of the $350,000, but it does give you a sense of where the funding could go.
Council, does anyone have any feedback on this item in particular? Do you have any preference?
I mean, thank you, Chair. I'm really excited about using this potentially, one, to look through our operational citywide transportation plans and then our pedestrian bike master plans, just with all the improvements and, again, to better understand our own active transportation plans and how they're connecting. We've seen and deliberated several different types of plans here, and I think this could help us as a tool. But obviously there's other utilization, it looks like, through here that could be helpful.
I think I share Councilmember Lopez Chavez's enthusiasm, especially since the announcement of the Olympics, and now it's a certainty. There's a higher likelihood that we see competing visions for infrastructure investment, and so us distilling our priorities and really doubling down on our plans and making sure that we're clear on what we're aiming for feels like a good use of our time and energy in a way that also benefits our constituents in the near term and doesn't just benefit them in the long term. So I share that enthusiasm, but we also heard about water and I love the idea of water conservation efforts to make sure, I want that south arm to get higher before that northern arm so we have bragging rights. So anyone else have any feedback on this item? All right, Ben, lead us to the next one. Oh,
Chair?
Councilmember Pui, go ahead.
Madam Chair, very quickly, I will spend as much time talking to all of you, sharing my thoughts on this. Thank you for allowing me to go first.
Are you still there?
Because this one is not funded at this time.
It is.
Connection is very bad, sorry.
Oh, okay, you're back. We can hear you. Go ahead.
75 is funded at this time. Okay.
Madam Chair, I was saying that I was going to spend as much time in the next couple of days talking to any of you, all of you, about this. And thank you for allowing me to go for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So it sounds like the council wants to prioritize number 75 for implementing the citywide transportation plan, traffic calming, and water conservation.
I think that's where we're leaning right now, but Councilmember Pui, I think, said he would value some time to interact. So I think take it as a tentative, likely direction, but if we could circle back to confirm that after everyone has had time to deliberate, that would be great.
Okay. The last one is an emergent situation that is not a CIP application and not on the funding log. This is the accidental application of herbicides on trees along North Temple. Council members Pui and Petro asked for an estimate of what it would cost to quickly make improvements so the corridor does not have dead trees for an extended period of time. The administration provided a cost estimate. It has 3 parts. The total is $505,000. This would include tree removal, grinding down the stumps, as well as the new trees to put in planters. There would be 100 planters, and it also includes the landscaping, soil removal, and then mulch to backfill in. The irrigation system along North Temple is in good condition. It does not need upgrading or replacing. Now the planters are proposed because the herbicide is still in the soil. Soil testing is ongoing. I believe results are pending, and that will determine how much contamination is there, how deep it goes, and how much soil should be removed or how long it should sit for the contamination to go away before putting the trees back in those locations along North Temple. The $505,000, you could address this in a budget amendment. Budget amendment number 1 is coming up for a briefing in the coming weeks. Since this is an emergent situation, we would typically look at fund balance as an option, but you could also look at funding it in CIP.
Yeah, I wanted to bring this up here. I'm not committed that it has to come out of CIP, but we do have the opportunity since it's open. It's a capital expense. It's a one-time expense, hopefully. So taking it from fund balance feels appropriate as well. But I think I'm appropriately speaking for Councilmember Pui and I when I say we're expecting quick replacement of these trees in this area. From what I've heard, and we're still waiting on results, but that ground could need to lay fallow between 2 and 5 years. That is entirely too long to wait. These were mature trees. So whether we want to take it from here or we want to do it from fund balance, I am completely open to my co-counselors, but it seemed appropriate since we have CIP open to bring it up. Yes, Councilmember Lopez Chavez.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to share support for this. I think it's important that we remediate and provide a solution for these residents. I want to know, Ben, would we continue to be at a healthy fund balance, I'm assuming, if we were to do one-time funding from general fund instead of CIP?
We would. You'd still be above the 13% minimum target. I don't have the exact numbers, but you would still have a healthy fund balance above your target goal.
Can we get that by email?
Yeah, I'd be more in favor and inclined to do it through general fund just because I don't want to cut from this already competitive process. So I want to follow our CIP process diligently.
Yeah.
So clarifying with Ben, we wouldn't have to cut at this point? We just wouldn't be able to add?
So there's $595,000 that has not been put into any project based on the potential scenario in the staff report, and I can review that if it's helpful.
That's the reason we're bringing it up.
And
So
I
it wouldn't
understand
require.
that. I'm kind of with Councilmember Jefferson for this. The idea of using the general fund and going through the budget process and not the CIP process. I understand the 595, but I also want to have that discussion with other budget items that are coming through and not just kind of like go, oh, we funded it through CIP. Because I also think I have other places I would rather use that 595. That's in the CIP. That's in the CIP discussion.
Absolutely.
So that's where I'm standing.
Is that everyone else too? Okay, I'm at peace with that decision as long as we're gonna move that ball forward.
And we'll track that for budget amendment number 1 to bring that back to you, along with a fund balance update.
Councilmember Puy, are you still there? Did you want to chime in on this?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I just wanted to echo that. Obviously, this is a matter of urgency, and I appreciate the administration to coming up with a solution that fits the problem. So, looking forward to.
All right, you're cutting out, but I did say thank you to this administration for coming up with a solution. And I'm going to fill in blanks that you want this done with urgency as well. Text me if I got it wrong.
Finding the manifest.
Okay.
Those were all of the priority projects for Councilmember Puy.
Councilmember Puy, we've lost any significant connection with you. If you text me, I will read your comment into the public record.
So,
for Wharton?
just how many was on that list? I want to make sure that we got all of them.
He had number 20, which would be potentially shifting $160,000 away. Number 22, which is not adding funding or shifting funding away, it's a scope change.
Okay.
Number 41, which is the California Avenue pedestrian safety improvements, which would be fully funding it from the canceled project a few blocks away. Number 48, which would be funding phase 1 design for $80,000. And then the International Peace Gardens is number 53. And that could also be wrapped into amplifying the Jordan River at 22, or it could be funded separately. I'm not sure what his preference is. And then the last one was number 75 that we just discussed. So that those were 6.
Okay. Well, since we talked about number 20, I, not surprisingly, would be opposed to taking that 160,000, as it says right there that this is critical to the continued success of Memory Grove, that the city begins to now restore, preserve, and renew assets that create the unique character of Memory Grove. So this is like our statewide designated memorial for Utah's war memorial. And in addition to that, it's one of the most heavily used parks in the city because of its proximity to downtown. It's also featured on Visit Salt Lake's website. It's featured on TripAdvisor. It gets a lot of attention and it gets a lot of use. And it is a lot of those structures are very, very old and crumbling, and they need a plan to save them. Right now, it's not something that we can continue to put off. And I would note also that because of like Memorial House and the agreement that the city has with Preservation Utah, there is like some opportunity to, we're never going to make money, but to gain some revenue to offset some of those costs with the use of Memorial House. This is also one of the oldest and longest standing neighborhood parks cleanups, so we're already getting a lot of free labor in Memory Grove every single year due to that ongoing effort. I would hate to see us take such a small amount, like relatively small, like 160, that we could use to really plan and preserve that important area and reallocate it somewhere else. This is also the only funding priority in District 3.
And just to clarify, Councilmember Wharton, Memory Grove is not, it didn't qualify for GeoBond funding, is that correct?
It was not identified for the GeoFund bond, so we could use GeoFund money there, but there's another park in District 3 that was identified as a higher priority for the GeoBond money for now. So just say I feel really strongly that this remain a high priority for us to fund. If anything, I think it should be more, but I think we should just maintain where it's at right now. And this is my only priority that I'll ask about, other than the $30,000 for historic markers, but I think that one's really easy. And that's not in my district.
Thank you. Councilmember Young, did you have something you wanted to add?
I do. So if we can go to project number 47. So this is a constituent application related to Fairmont Park and improvements and kind of an overhaul to the existing basketball court. I want to be clear, fully support this. With that said, we've also recognized in working with the Sugar House Community Council, Parks, Open Spaces, and Trails, that there is going to be an upcoming community engagement effort related to Fairmont Park for the Geo Bond. And that it feels a little out of order in terms of approving a project like this without necessarily having that information to help inform kind of final decision making around that. I also did go knock doors around the park to some of the neighbors last week in the evening, and just heard that there were some constituents who had some additional input related to the scope. So I would like to keep it on the list, but I'm hoping that we can adjust the scope to preserve the opportunity for those residents to give input, and adjust it to say that the size, location, and amenities will be determined through public engagement in coordination with other projects in the park. So we would basically remove, amend that scope for where it says this proposal would create a standard full-size court. We would leave those details to be weighed in on as part of the future engagement process.
So you're not advocating for any additional funding or any less funding, you're just saying that you want to amend the commitment we're making to the community through the funding?
Correct.
Okay.
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
This will be quick. I had signaled prior in conversations that 35 was something of interest in funding. It's actually something that I did hear the playground has been replaced. So there was no need for this funding. So I would advocate that we do not include this at all if there was any if that was something our staff had written down, to please exclude number 35.
Thank you. Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you. On the funding, we have the 595,000 that's remaining to go. And I'm just looking at the street side of the house. We've been talking about this for a long time, about our streets need repair, but also they need to be safer. And so I was looking at advocating 100,000 of this to item number 11. So increasing number 11, which is a safer crossing project, by 100 grand. And then taking the other 495 to item number 4 or 6, which is the street reconstruction. So increasing 4 and 4 or 6, because those are scalable, and increasing the saving crossing, because we always talk about more money going to our crosswalks. This would add just another 100 grand, which would not be a hawk, but it could be increasing the crossings. So splitting the 595 into two pieces in two different projects that are already funded.
I'm not sure if our feed has frozen, but just to repeat what Council Member Dugan said, under the funding scenario in the staff report, there's $595,000 that would not be allocated to any project. And his proposal, as I heard it, was to move $100,000 to project number 11, which is the safer crossings. And this would be to ensure the funding level is enough to fund a hawk signal, which is one of the more expensive pedestrian safety improvements. And at the $300,000 level, it would not be enough to do a hawk signal. It would be $400,000 total. It would be $100,000 additional. And then the remaining $495,000 would go to the street reconstructions, which is number 4, I believe.
Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
So the safer crossing citywide, where does that hawk signal go?
Yeah, as I say, we're paying for one.
This is number 11 doesn't specify a hawk. It just says safer crossing. So it could be a hawk. It could be other.
But if it's a hawk, we're only allocating enough for one.
If you were to take it for a hawk, a hawk would consume all of that money. We do have one hawk crossing funded, separate funding for one single hawk already. That's a different line item. This is safer street crossings, so it's not designated as a specific location. So number 11, if you look at it, pedestrian focused crossings such as hawks or the rectangular rapid flashing beacons or raised crosswalks, something at the crossing, not specific to any area, just a general funding of from 300,000 to 400,000. They were asked for 600. We had 300. I'm just saying let's bump it up another 100 grand.
Yes, sir.
Those priorities that Councilmember Dugan just flagged are also priorities for me, but I would also like us to consider that extra. What did you say? $595,000 to going to item number 48 instead of just doing the $80,000 for design, actually fully funding that project. That's the Fayette Avenue improvements. I know that that's something that has been a request for more than 1 year and is something that I've heard from many constituents this year that are interested in that. So
does this qualify though for alternative funding that we can access later on?
The Fayette Avenue, I don't believe it would be eligible for parks impact fees. If it is, it will be very small
space. It's the street itself is really poor condition, and it doesn't have curb and gutter at all. And there's we've heard a lot from that neighborhood about parking concerns, and this would add a lot of on-street parking. So I'm not opposed. I share the priorities for those. I wonder if, I guess I would just like to consider potentially fully funding this one as well. And then I think that still leaves about $100,000. If there's 590, we already have 80,000 for this. And then that could go into that safer street crossings.
I want to ask Ben, we in previous conversations had discussed funding some projects that I know we said we supported. Does that final number of 595,000, include all these conversations or, okay.
So I think this is where it'd be helpful if I reviewed the funding
Please, yeah.
scenario in the staff report. If we could switch.
Can we do it
display.
with some speed? We are now at the end of our time. I don't mind asking our board appointee to wait another 5, but
Yes.
just know that we're in our final moments here.
The table on pages 2 and 3 of the staff report lists the projects that council members have mentioned in previous CIP briefings that you were interested in maybe funding or you had additional questions on. There are 17 of those projects, and it would be over $15 million to fully fund them all. So we don't have that much money. The funding amounts in the middle column, potential additional, the projects that have funding there are only the projects where multiple council members expressed interest. So number 12, the Sugar House Park Authority Pavilion, this is an additional $480,000, so it would fully fund the project. At one of the July briefings, it was mentioned that the county is splitting the cost 50-50 with the city. So adding the $480,000, it would be $960 total, and that matches the $960,000 that the county has budgeted. It would be a total of 2 new pavilions in Sugar House Park. Going down to 19, the traffic signal replacements and upgrades. The council had discussed that at the recommended funding level of $860,000, it would be a little bit short based on the typical cost for traffic signal replacements. They're usually $450,000 each. So adding the additional $40,000 would be enough for 2 of the traffic signal replacements. Can we scroll down to the next page? Yep. Number 29, this is a existing community garden. It would be brought up to city standards, and it would create a new food forest next to that existing community garden. The council discussed only funding $20,000 for soil testing. It's unclear what the extent of the contamination is at that site. The reason to not fully fund it with parks impact fees is if it's determined that the contamination is cost prohibitive or if there are other reasons to not proceed, then we would have to go through a reimbursement of those parks impact fees with interest to the general fund because we didn't use them for the eligible project. If the soil testing comes back and it says, yes, we can do this, it is viable, then the council would request in a budget amendment fully funding the project with parks impact fees because it's fully eligible.
This is in my district, and we spoke to the nonprofit partner that's going to execute this, and they agree with this strategy. They think this is a decent strategy, and I like that it also frees up other capital to check off as many other things as we can on here.
Number 38, the council discussed adding this raised crosswalk on 500 East. It is situated between First Step House. They have multiple facilities on the west side of that block and the Smith's Marketplace on the east side of that block. This would have some traffic calming benefits, and it would be fully funded at $115. Number 41, we talked about this earlier. This would be funded from recapturing that canceled project at the Sorensen Community Center and instead using it, the $807,000, for the traffic calming a few blocks down the road near the Glendale Middle School. Number 48, this is the $80,000 for design as a phase 1, which Councilmember Mano just suggested fully funding instead. And all of those is how we got to the 595. If we scroll down just a little bit to the green highlight. So the $1.5 million is funding these 6 projects I just reviewed, and the $595,000 is the remainder. That's not available, or that's available to any project.
So I do want to wrap this up here, but we do have this tentatively on the August 27th work session for another 20-minute wrap up. Tonight is our last hearing on it. Do you all want to have one more final hearing together on the public or one more final work session with it on the public record? Or do you just want to convince each other? There's going to be a lot of negotiating going on and convincing and persuading, I think, for the next couple weeks. So should we have one more on the 27th
I would
to
like
firm
to.
up?
I think
Okay.
I would
One
like
more
to. But
work session or another
Yeah, on work session.
work session?
Tonight is the last public hearing for the public to chime in during.
I think it's appropriate for us to discuss after the public
Okay.
hearing again if
I
there's
just-
time
okay.
for that.
Just one final question for Ben and the staff. Reading through item number 48 that Councilmember Mana was just talking about, and it says here, it is intended that the city's funding for this project could be a match for TIF project with UDOT. So, was that a one-on-one match? If we could get some clarity on what that match meant, and how much UDOT is gonna pay for this, because it sounds like this 560, unless we have a match from UDOT and they're part of it, it's not gonna get completed.
We'll get more clarity on that because typically CIP is only allowed to be spent on city-owned property. So the UDOT property, I think, is immediately adjacent to where this CIP project would be, but I don't know the matching funds.
Yeah, and how that works into the project. So if we're only completing half, are we still, we have a half job, we have a job that's half done.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Ben, for walking us through that. Counselors, thank you for your homework. And now you get another 2 weeks to finish the assignment. All right. Thank you. Now we're going to move on to a library board appointment. Trisha Pill, are you here in person? Come on up, Trisha. Typically, we give everyone a minute or two just to introduce themselves. You can have a seat. Just to introduce themselves, tell us why you're interested in this position. And if you'll just make sure the green light is on the microphone before you start speaking. Where it says push on there.
Oh, now it's
Yep.
on.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, Council. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to meet and speak with you. My name is Trisha Pill, and I'm applying for appointment to the Public Library Board. I'm a pediatrician. I moved to Salt Lake City 3 years ago from Pittsburgh. My interest and passion for the public library stems from my own childhood. I was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, the first generation American of immigrant parents from Taiwan and Thailand. When I started kindergarten, I didn't speak any English. That was also the same year that my mother went back to work full-time, working for Nashville Public Radio, WPLN, which at the time was in the Nashville City Council building, right down the hall from the Nashville Public Library. Back in those days, there was no such thing and no money for after-school care. So it was my job every day after school to walk to my mother's office and then down the hall to the public library and entertain myself until 5 o'clock when my mom got off of work. It was the post-Vietnam era. There was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment. I was a very lonely and frightened child. The children's librarian in the public library, I still remember her name, Miss McNabb, took me under her wing. I learned to read in the public library. I learned to speak English there. I even learned the Dewey Decimal System and helped her stamp books. This was back in the day when you stamped due dates in the back of the book. The public library opened up a world of knowledge and learning and self-improvement and potential, and changed the trajectory of my life. I'm semi-retired now and an empty nester, so I'm fortunate to be in a position where I can give back to an institution that has benefited me so much. Salt Lake City is my new home now, and so I'd like to do what I can to make the public library here a resource for the community, so it can be for anybody. It doesn't matter where you come from or who you are, but that you can use the library as a resource to make a better life for yourself.
Thank you. That might be my most favorite introduction we've ever had. Thank you. And also, if you're an empty nester, I need to know your skincare regime because you look so young.
Thank you.
So, Council, anyone have any feedback?
Touching. That was a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
We're so fortunate to have you, first of all, choosing Salt Lake to be your home, and second of all, to devote your energy. You will be on a consent agenda tonight, so we'll vote to approve you then, and you'll officially be appointed to the board. We don't take for granted that you're donating your time and energy, and we're very appreciative that you do that. So
Thank you. It's my honor and privilege.
Thank you. All right, Council, you have written briefings regarding the cultural core and the blocks approved budget update. You have a written briefing on the Economic Development Loan Fund for Policy Kings Brewery LLC. Please be sure to review those at your convenience. Next, report of the chair or vice chair. Vice chair, do you have anything? I do not either. Next, report or announcements from the executive director.
I just have one that's pretty time sensitive. The upcoming trip to Matsumoto, Japan, for the Sister Cities visit is a trip that is not included in the City Council policy manual. And so we just have added 2 announcements confirming that Councilmember Mono is interested in traveling and whether that would have support from the full council for the office to pay for those expenses.
And so we're straw polling, sending Councilmember Mono as the representative from the council on the Sister City trip.
Yes.
Okay. So someone wanna, yeah. He is traveling as a city representative, so we will be covering his expenses, but we are limiting it to 1 representative from council.
I would like to straw poll that we support Councilmember Mono being our representative for Sister Cities, especially noting the leadership he demonstrated when that city came here earlier this year.
And his significant cross-cultural competency in representing not just the council, but the whole city. So let's show our feelings on it. Okay, that's 5 in a support, 1 in dissent, being Councilmember Dugan, and Pui is absent. Thank you.
And then the first item on the announcement sheet, if you saw it, is just a correction to the staffing document to reflect what the council discussed and verbally approved, and making sure that the budget adoption documents reflect that. We missed something, and so we want to correct that, but also wanted to correct the public record.
Thank you.
Can I say something about what we just voted on? I think that this is supported it for all the reasons that the chair said, and that this is an important relationship, but I really want to emphasize how much I feel like we need a policy in this area moving forward, and how I think that especially if other sister cities where we have less of a direct connection come up, there needs to be some kind of a way for us to decide how we're gonna, how many people we send, or whether we send anybody, what percentage that we cover. And so I'm straw polling in favor, but it's in good faith that we're actually gonna see some movement on getting this policy in place.
Yeah, it would be my intention during my chairship of a travel policy, not just for Sister City, but in general.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the conversation I had with Councilmember Mono before this vote and the discussion on it. And I agree that we do need a policy, and I just thought at this point, to me, it wasn't right that we had this come up at this point in our process, and it does show us that we do need a policy, and we have been kicking that policy down the road for all of years I've been in the council, and I think years prior in the council. So this is a good time and opportunity to have that policy in place. I was just opposed to it just for the reasons that Councilmember Wharton just said. So thank you, and appreciate the conversations we've had.
All right.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Anything else? All right, then we have no closed sessions, so we will stand adjourned from work session and reconvene in 10 minutes in the formal chambers. So chew quickly, friends.